2, 1.
Evening, everyone. Welcome to the, there's a motorcycle behind me. Welcome to the August 20th. Hold on, and my connection's unstable, so I'm going to turn off my video. I apologize. Okay, welcome to August 20th City Council meeting. I'm Gina Louise Shara. I'll be presenting this evening. The meeting and all who participate in it with us on Zoom will be audio and video recorded. We are going to begin with public comment as we always do. If you know that you wish to make a public comment, please use the raised hand feature. To raise your hand, you click on the participants panel in the horizontal menu bar at the bottom of your screen, and a column will open up with the participants of the meeting. To raise your hand, the raise hand feature should be at the bottom of that panel. So also, if you're calling in by phone and you want to raise your hand, you can do that by hitting *9. Trouble raising your hand feature, which is also in that horizontal menu bar. I'll do my best to monitor that for people having difficulties. That's the only option, and it'll only be used during public comment. I will unmute each raised hand and ask if you'd like to make a comment. When you begin, please state your name and your city or town for the public record. To ensure everyone has equal opportunity to speak, we ask that you limit your comments to 3 minutes. After 3 minutes, I will ask you to please finish your sentence. According to council rules, we do not respond during public comment as it's your time to speak. So while your comments should be directed to us, you will understand when we don't respond. You may speak on any topic. It doesn't need to be an item on the agenda. But due to the size of the meeting, that's public and how Zoom works, all participants will be muted until called upon. I'll also ask that you turn off your video until called upon, as comments are directed to the council and only the person recognized has the floor. We'll do our best to act quickly if someone is clearly acting in a way that's inappropriate or deploying profanity or slurs or displaying something outside of what one would expect in council chambers. And I'll remove anyone that needs to be removed from the meeting. If you don't wish to make a comment, we ask that you watch on Channel 15 or by streaming on Northampton Open Media through their YouTube channel or other platforms. The recording of this meeting will be available on Northampton Open Media's government archive, video archive channel on YouTube, and I thank them as always. And I'll remind everyone they're always happy to receive comments by email, and they're equally part of the public record. So I just want to apologize that I have my video turned off. My connection is kind of dicey and unstable, it says, so I'm trying to keep it going. I don't like not being able to have my face viewed by the public during these meetings, but I'll try it again a little bit and see if it gets any better, but I apologize for that. It is very much not my preference. I am going to start with Steve Jones.
Thank you very much. I'm Steve Jones. I live at 123 Black Birch Trail in Florence. I'm a public health physician that worked for a long time at the Centers for Disease Control, and I want to speak positively about the council's considering declaring that racism is a public health crisis. From my public health work, we know that there are huge disparities between white and people of color in almost every health measure, whether it's life expectancy or death rates or whatever. And racism is clearly a major contributor to those differences. I applaud the fact that the council is going to consider that. The Board of Health meeting started at 5:30 from Northampton Board of Health, and they passed a resolution declaring that racism is a public health crisis, and they adopted the language which the council will consider later on and worthy of treatment, assessment, and financial investment in order to eradicate negative health impacts. So I would say thank you to the counselors that brought this to be discussed by the council. I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay. And next, we have John. John, if you would please state your name and your city or town for the public record.
Hi, I'm John Parody, live at 55 Ice Pond Drive in Florence. And I'm here tonight on behalf of the Holyoke Soldiers Home Coalition. First, I want to extend my appreciation to my ward counselor, John Thorpe. He's doing an outstanding job keeping us all informed, and the emails and the updates, John, are much appreciated. So thank you. Also want to extend my thank you and gratitude to Michael Quinlan, Marianne Labarge, Mayor Narkowitz, the Veterans Council of Northampton, and the Steve Connor for putting forth the resolution in support of our efforts as a coalition. The coalition is an organization of veteran leaders, family members, veteran service representatives, and concerned citizens, including former members of the executive leadership team of the Soldiers Home in Holyoke. We came together in the aftermath of the terrible tragedy of losing 76 veterans to COVID-19, and what we can do as a community to come together to move forward. A major focus for our coalition is to ensure that we as veterans and family members of veterans are included in any major reforms or changes to the governance of the Soldiers Home and in the plan to build a new home as now pledged by the Commonwealth through our advocacy. Our biggest call to action right now is that outreach effort must include a process for the state to receive feedback and consensus from family members and from the veteran community in Western Mass. In the past 2 months since we came together as a grassroots organization, our coalition has grown to more than 70 members, including now 11 family members of either residents at the home or residents who have passed away of COVID-19, as well as more than 2,000 plus people who have pledged their support. In addition, more than 19 cities and towns and organizations have sponsored resolutions or have written letters of support. And you're in a good company here in Northampton. So on a personal note, I'll say this: when I was a deputy superintendent at the Soldiers Home, Superintendent Paul Barabani and I made a point that for every veteran that was admitted to the home on the first day of admission, we would go down and we would welcome that veteran to the home. And as you can all imagine, for a day such as that, where you leave your family, possibly for the last time for your final residence in a long-term care facility, the great apprehension, the anxiety, all that goes into that first day, we made sure that they knew, and we would look them in the eye and tell them that it is our promise that we would do everything we could to ensure that they received the utmost care with the greatest honor and dignity. And that was our pledge and our promise to them. And on the final day, when they would pass away, we would have a farewell. That is something that Paul Barabani created first at the Soldiers Home in Holyoke, where we'd have a farewell ceremony where the veteran would be draped in the American flag. We would render a salute, and we would play taps. So just to give you the level of our pledge to them. And it was so damaging to the soul that when we would say that is our personal promise to you, that we knew that everything that we were doing to appeal and to petition our Commonwealth to get the needed staffing and the resources, we could not deliver. And we could not deliver on that promise because our Commonwealth was not providing the proper care. And the warnings that we provided on infection control and other things that would occur if the state did not give due diligence and attention to the necessary requirements for a long-term care facility. So now it's our time to get it right as a community, as citizens. And as I mentioned, we have a lot of momentum. Paul Barabani and I had a meeting yesterday with the chairman of the Board of Trustees. We told him, we are your community support team. And he told us that if it were not for us, he's not sure if the state would have clearly listened to the voices of the family members and those veterans with what is now necessary to make sure that we truly are a shining example. And we truly are, as many of us say, on Memorial Day and Veterans Day that we have the best veteran service programs in our nation. So again, I thank you so much for taking on this resolution, and I'll stay throughout the meeting if there's any questions. And I know Steve Connor's on the meeting too as well to answer any questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next, I apologize, my computer crashed before the timer also crashed, so I'm get the timer back up too. Jose A. Say.
Hi, everyone. I hope you're doing well. I'm Jose Adastra. I live in word 3 or 7. I'm still not exactly sure. But I live here with my 2, almost any day now, 3 kids, and my partners. So I would love it if, besides some language that declares public health crisis about racism, if you took some of the requests that your local defund group has been making to actually help people on the ground, instead of write this beautiful language, beautiful document that is significant, but not, you're still over policing the homeless, even though, I'm hearing some people are going to complain at the police office, and the reason that the police are giving that they're not going to Pulaski as often is because of the budget cuts, which I think is very inappropriate for them to say, because it's not accurate. They're not going because we're watching them and there's pressure on them and everyone is communicating, and that's clear. And I'm really uncomfortable that it doesn't really seem like you have any control over the police department at all, over whether that's completely inappropriate to blame a budget cut for them not policing them. They've been clearing the homeless camps. They have been policing them. They've been moving them around, and they're constantly harassing them, and they know they shouldn't be around them. And instead of patting yourselves on the back for this document, I've seen the same people homeless for almost a decade now. That's a shame on the local government. It's a shame on really all of you who don't really seem to be experienced enough to be governing right now during this crisis. I'm begging you to try to find it in your heart to find a way to work with us. I don't know how you would want to do it, whether you would want to directly oversee purchases of goods for them, but there's a lot of money now. And somehow, whether you want me to put a deposit down so that you can release some funds a little bit at a time, I can cover the, liability, but we must find a way to directly assist the people that are homeless here. And there's so many of us willing to do that. I really beg you to try to find it in your heart to actually cooperate with the people on the ground who know the people who are homeless here and know what their needs are, because there's a lot of us. We're all in various professional fields, and we're not enemies. We're trying to take care of the same community. We disagree on how it's happening. So I beg you to, my daughter wants to say hi. But I'm begging you, try to find it in your heart to cooperate with us and to ease the propaganda the police are putting out, because when civilians go to the homeless like that with the attitude of, oh, these people shouldn't be here, that you put their lives in danger when you portray them as we're not patrolling them because of that cut. It's really bad. It's a bad thing to do to the people here. God bless.
Okay, I don't see any other hands. If there's anyone else who would like to speak a public comment, now would be the time to raise your hand again. Go to the participant bar in the bottom of the screen, and it'll open a window, and that will then give you the option for raising your hand. Otherwise, you can send me a chat right now. Otherwise, we are going to convene the meeting and end public comment. Okay. Seeing no, oh, here's one. Okay. So this This is phone number ending in 7081. Says, ask to unmute. Can you unmute? It just gives me the option to ask you to unmute. So you're gonna have to, anyone know the combination on the phone for unmuting?
Star 9, I believe.
Star 9 I thought was raise hand, but give it a try.
Oh dear. Is it star 6?
Try star 6 and see if that will unmute you since you're coming in through a phone. Still not unmuted. I'm gonna wait one more sec, see if we can figure it out. Unmute Zoom on phone. Anybody? Anybody? Oh, Counselor Foster.
Thank you. I just did a quick Google and it says it should be star 6 by phone.
Okay, so phone number 7081. Hit star 6 on your phone to unmute yourself. Oh. Okay. That doesn't seem to be working, or you don't seem to be able to do it. So I'm sorry. Again, it's star 6 on your keypad on your phone. Okay. I'm sorry that's not working for you. We have to move on and convene the meeting. Please feel free to send us an email at citycouncil@northamptonma.gov with the comment that you wanted to make, or you can find all of our individual emails on the city's website and City Council, and our phone numbers. Okay, so Laura, will you please roll?
Sure. Counselor Dwight.
Hold up.
Here.
Counselor Foster.
Here.
Counselor Jarrett.
Here.
Counselor Labarge.
Present.
Counselor Maori.
Here.
Counselor Nash.
Here.
Counselor Quinlan.
Here.
Counselor Shara.
Here.
And Counselor Thorpe.
Here.
Madam Chair, you have a quorum.
Thank you, Laura. Okay, first item is the announcement of public hearings. This is an announcement of a package of 4 public hearings, a public hearing on a package of 4 National Grid Verizon poll petitions for King Street and Finn Street. So for Mass General Chapter 66, Section 22, a public hearing will be held on Thursday, September 3rd, 2020, 7:05 p.m. on polling petitions of National Grid Verizon New England to erect poles and wires upon, along, under, or across one or more public 1.79 National Grid Verizon poll petition for Finn Street. This is petition number 24891246-5. 20.080, which is petition number 24881246-1. 20.081, which is petition number 24881246-2, and 20.082, which is petition number 24881246-3. The hearing will be held via remote participation, so please see the agenda for the September 2020 City Council meeting for instructions for accessing that meeting, and the notice will also be duly posted per Mass General Law. So that is the announcement of those public hearings at our next meeting. Next on the agenda, I'll give a quick update in advance of announcing the appointees to the Northampton Policing Review Commission at our next meeting on September 3rd. I wanted to just give a brief update. I can announce that the 2 counselors have been appointed, and they are Counselor Quinlan and Counselor Jarrett. I'm very grateful for their willingness to serve and to take on this additional commitment and the time. And I know that they are committed to digging in and doing the work with their colleagues on it. For the remaining 7 council resident appointees, we have had an outstanding response to the call for letters of interest. The city council has received 50 letters. Many people applied to both the mayor and to the council, and I think the combined total is somewhere around 63 people submitting letters. I want to thank everyone who sent in letters, many of which were extremely detailed and provide thoughtful information pertaining to the work of the commission and the applicant's relevant interest. It's really a remarkable group of residents that have indicated their willingness to give their time and experience and talent to this work, and I'm very, very thankful. I also really want to thank the council and Laura for all the work you've done to inform residents of Northampton about the commission. I know that many of you have had in-depth conversations with people that you've encouraged to apply, and I think the really remarkable response we've gotten is proof of your work and your commitment. So I thank you very much for that. That's my only announcement. Are there any committee chairs that would like to make announcements?
I would.
Okay, Councilor Labarge.
I just want to announce that City Service Committee will not be held on September 7th due to Labor Day. It will be held on September 9th, Wednesday, 4 p.m., and it will be held by remote participation. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other committee chair announcements, or how about recognitions or 1-minute announcements from councilors?
Yes.
Okay, I see Councilor Quinlan, then Councilor Jarrett, then Councilor Labarge. Councilor Quinlan? Oh, and then Councilor Foster.
Thank you. I'd just like to recognize and congratulate my friend. I'm a resident.
Councilor Quinlan, I don't know. I'm looking at people's faces and I'm thinking it's not just me that's having trouble hearing you.
I am problem hearing.
Your compression is really bad there, Councilor Quinlan.
How's that?
Oh, better.
There you go. Much better.
Thank you. Okay. I'd like to recognize and congratulate my friend and longtime Northampton resident, Al Griggs, for his upcoming Governor's Award in the Humanities. Al has put decades of tremendous efforts to promote art, literature, and philosophy to the underserved populations of our region, and I'm just thrilled that he's being recognized for those endeavors. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Jarrett.
Last July, on July 12th, I held our first Ward 5 gathering with school committee member Dina Levy, and so that was a great gathering. We're going to hold another this Sunday, August 23rd from 4 to 5 p.m. We'll be sharing what's happening with the City Council and the school committee, taking questions, hearing concerns and ideas. And again, people can register to receive the Zoom link, and that can be done on my website, the Facebook page, or by emailing or calling me. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Labarge.
Thank you. I want to commend our council clerk, Laura Ketzler. She has gone way beyond, and I mean way beyond, of her duties.
Goodness.
And I appreciate, and I know every counselor does, of how hard you work, Laura. We are very, very fortunate to have you. And thank you for everything that you do for us counselors. I appreciate it also. Thank you.
Thank you for your kind words.
Indeed, I couldn't agree more.
Oh, it just froze. Can you hear me okay?
I can, yeah.
Oh, okay, great. So I've been working with the Northampton Kiwanis Club. We've been supplying meals and baked goods to the cathedral in the night dinners every Sunday evening. They're serving from 70 to 90 people. The need has increased dramatically during the pandemic. And typically the meals they serve come from donations from local church services. And so the stream of typical donations is down and the need is up. So I've been coordinating vegetarian meals and baked goods every Sunday night. I'm committed to doing it until churches are back. We definitely could use a hand. So if anybody has some energy, looking forward to doing something concrete and really make a difference, Councilor Quinlan has, and a wide variety of people have donated a meal or some baked goods. Please contact me and I can give you all the details.
Thank you. Okay, councilors, anybody else have an announcement? Mr. Mayor?
Yes, good evening. Good evening, members of the City Council. I just wanted to make a quick announcement about the Shared Streets and Spaces project that, as I speak, is still being put together. Main Street was closed today, as well as parking on Main Street. And we've had a team of volunteers and staff out there all day working to lay out new lines and new striping in the section of Main Street between King and Pleasant and South and State. And shortly, the DPW will be mobilizing to begin installing concrete blocks. And then shortly thereafter, the street will reopen late tonight. Main Street will reopen late tonight, but we'll also be coming in behind with flower pots and flowers and street art. And other work will happen tomorrow. There will be no parking on Main Street tomorrow until about 4 p.m. So that we can complete some of the work. But I just want to thank all of the volunteers as well as all the city staff, and obviously thank everyone for their patience while we implement this grant-funded program to try to create more public space in our downtown. And obviously, the overarching goal is to try to help support the economics of our downtown and support our businesses, which are obviously been struggling during the COVID-19 pandemic. So just reminding people, we do have a lot of signage out on the approaches to downtown, but please find an alternate route, at least through this evening, and it'll be reopened again tomorrow. So thank you.
Thank you for that update. It's exciting what's happening downtown. Okay, so first up under resolutions, we have 20.105, a resolution of the Soldiers' Home in Holyoke. This is in the year 2020 upon, upon the recommendation of Mayor David J. Narkowitz, the Northampton Department of Veteran Services, Councilor Mary Ann LaBarge, and Councilor Michael Quinlan Jr. R 20.105, a resolution for the Soldiers' Home in Holyoke, a resolution honoring the 5 Hampton veterans who lost their lives to COVID-19 at the Holyoke Soldiers' Home. Be it resolved by the City Council of the City of Northampton and City Council assembled as follows. Whereas America's veterans have served our country and community, defended our liberties, and should live with respect and a good quality of life, and are entitled to death with dignity. Whereas in 1952, the Soldiers' Home in Holyoke opened and has provided, quote, care with honor and dignity, end quote, to thousands of Massachusetts veterans for over 68 years. And in that time, countless Northampton residents have been cared for at the Soldiers' Home. Whereas in 2010, veterans' rooms at the Holyoke Soldiers' Home were determined by the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs to be non-compliant with the Uniform Federal Accessibility Standard. Whereas in 2012, the Massachusetts Division of Capital Assets Management and Maintenance commissioned a needs assessment study that determined that of the 278 current beds, less than 5% meet VA standards, end quote. Whereas in 2013, a design to add 120 private rooms as well as convert existing rooms, thus creating 278 fully compliant beds, was approved by the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs, VA, for 65% federal funding. However, the state has repeatedly failed to commit its 35% share of matching funds required to allow for the start of construction. A project to create an adult day health care program at the Soldiers' Home in Holyoke was also approved by the VA for 65% funding. However, it also has never received Massachusetts' commitment for the 35% matching funds. Whereas in November 2017, with the support of Governor Legislature, the state approved $199 million to build a new 154-bed long-term care facility at the Soldiers' Home in Chelsea, while disregarding the long-documented deficiencies at the Holyoke Soldiers' Home. Whereas the lack of sufficient space and staff were major contributing factors in the rapid spread of the novel coronavirus 19 at the home, which resulted in the deaths of 76 veterans, including 5 Northampton residents who tested positive for COVID-19. This atrocity is one of our country's worst veteran tragedies and contradicts Massachusetts' claim of being the best in the nation for veteran benefits. Whereas all veterans deserve equal treatment in Massachusetts, state-funded veterans to include the same living conditions, as well as proportionate funding to provide for a safe and efficient level of staffing in all departments. Now, therefore, it be resolved that the sponsors call upon the Northampton City Council to urge Governor Baker and the Massachusetts State Legislature to take immediate action to increase funding to ensure sufficient staff, equipment, and supplies to provide safe care, and to expedite the design of the new Soldiers' Home in Holyoke to allow for the construction of fully compliant rooms for 250 veterans, including a toilet and shower in each bedroom, and the establishment of an adult day health care program to meet the VA project submission date of April 15, 2021, in order to provide the best in care for, quote, those who have borne the battle, end quote, and sacrificed their safety and well-being to preserve our nation's freedom. Be it further resolved that the administrative assistant to the City Council shall cause a copy of this resolution to be sent to Governor Charles Baker, House Speaker Robert DeLeo, Senate President Karen Spilka, chairs of the Joint Committee on Veterans and Federal Affairs, Senator Walter F. Timilty, Representative Linda Dean Campbell, Vice Chair Senator Michael F. Rush, State Representative Lindsay Sabadoza, and Senator Joe Comerford. Okay. Council, is there a motion, please?
So moved. Move to accept.
Seconded.
Motion's been made by Councilor Dwight and seconded, I believe, by Councilor Thorpe. Would the sponsors like to speak first? Councilor Labarge, I see your hand.
Yes. As we all know, the trustees of the Soldiers' Home in Holyoke have endorsed multiple recommendations made in a highly critical state investigation into dozens and dozens and dozens of COVID-19 related deaths of our aging veterans. It has become very difficult for me tonight and my family. My husband was in the Army in the early part of the Vietnam War. His 2 brothers also were in the service. I have many relatives here in the city, and my husband, a huge, large family of nieces and nephews in the area who have served our country, and one just retired now with 38 years. So to have something like this happen is very heartbreaking for everybody. And as we all know, the trustees of the Soldiers' Home in Holyoke did and have made many recommendations. The members passed 13 resolutions. That was in the early, probably the middle part of July. And many more recommendations have been made now. And those recommendations were widespread improvements to the operations and the management of the home. Several utterly baffling decisions were made at the Soldiers' Home that allowed the disease to run rampant, and it did. 76 of our veterans who contracted the COVID-19 disease at the Soldiers' Home have passed away. 5 of them were from Northampton. And I also want to thank at that point State Rep Lindsay Sabadoza, who I had called in reference of finding out exactly how many residents in Northampton in our area had passed away at the Holyoke Soldiers' Home with COVID-19. And one of those residents was from Ward 6, and I knew the husband very well, and the wife and the family. And it was very heartbreaking for me to have to talk to the wife when she told me that he was diagnosed with a slight case of the COVID-19. And 2 weeks later, I received a call that he had passed away. So it is heartbreaking. 76 of our veterans who contracted the COVID-19 disease at that Soldiers' Home have passed away. Many other communities have already passed these resolutions. I do know that Amherst, Granby, Ware, Southwick, and Ludlow, and hopefully Northampton will be on the list. I am urging Governor Baker and the legislature to stop rerouting funds that were scheduled for Northampton funds that might have saved the lives in 2020. We need Governor Baker to step forth, look, and listen to the dire need of the significant funding needed to upgrade the 68-year-old facility in Holyoke. These soldiers are soldiers who have lost their lives due to deplorable conditions and have served our country and community, defended our liberty, should have lived with respect and a good quality of life, and were entitled to death with dignity. We all give our condolence to all the families of the soldiers who passed from COVID-19 at the Holyoke Soldiers Home. I also want to thank our veterans agent, Steve Connors, who approached me about two and a half weeks ago when I had seen him at the Elks, if I wouldn't mind being a sponsor, and I was honored. He then told me how Counselor Michael Quinlan also was going to be a co-sponsor, so both Michael and I connected. And there was one part of that resolution that I was very pleased that was added on, that I had sent to Michael. And thank you for adding that on, because it means so much to so many veterans and their families. Thank you. And I am hoping tonight that we can do 2 readings on this. I think it's very critical and urgent that we get this to the State House. Thank you, counselors.
Thank you, Councilor Labarge. Councilor Quinlan, would you like to speak?
I would. Thank you so much. I'd like to thank the co-sponsors of this resolution. Councilor Labarge, thank you. Your passion for the issue and your family's history with Rich's service and your commitment to our veterans is just terrific. Steve Connor and John Parody, thank you for your current, but also your continued service to your fellow veterans. Your guidance on this resolution, providing so much information and encouragement, clearly is what made this happen. And finally, Mayor Narkowitz, thank you so much. Northampton and Steve Connor's fierce advocacy for our veterans is made possible by your leadership. And so I thank you for your service and your leadership and your partnership specifically on this resolution. In addition to the co-sponsors, like Councilor Labarge, I'd like to thank Representative Lindsay Sabadosa for your help and encouragement, and also to my friend Dan McCarthy from West Springfield, who's a proud veteran, who was the first person to introduce this resolution to me and ask me if it's something that I would look at to bring to the Northampton City Council. So thank you, Dan. I also would like to, on a personal note, just extend my condolences to the families of the 5 Northampton veteran soldiers who lost their lives at the Holyoke Soldiers Home. You know, a few years ago, my wife's grandfather spent his final years there, and during that time, he received quality and appropriate care, and Kim and our boys, her parents, her grandmother, and I could all go visit, and we had the chance to be there at the end, and I can't imagine the heart-wrenching anguish you must have felt to not be able to be there and visit in person for your loved ones. You know, when we began working on this, Steve Connor sent me the 2-page list of names of 76 veterans that lost their lives to COVID at the Holyoke Soldiers Home. It's a somber moment reading those names. I mean, it's 2 pages. It just reads long to just read those names and know what it means. Right now, we're seeing multiple investigations into what happened, and we're watching a great blame game unfold. But let's be very clear, blame is not going to bring back these veterans. Blame is not going to prevent another outbreak, and blame will not magically make the Holyoke Soldiers Home a safer, more suitable facility. It's time for Governor Baker and our state legislature to take action and approve the funding to create a new, safer, and compliant Soldiers Home in Holyoke. You know, just as a note, I've told you before, I like math. Northampton represents about 3.5%, 3%, 3.5%, somewhere in there, of the population of the area that's served by the Soldiers Home. But we also represent about 7% of the deaths of the 76. So we took our fair share there and more. You know, when you read that in 2017, funding was approved for the project in Chelsea, it just smacks of the willful ignorance of Western Mass by our state politicians. But make no mistake, when you understand that in 2010 and 12, this facility was found to be substandard, this is no longer ignorance. This is willful negligence. Governor Patrick and now Governor Baker have chosen to ignore the Holyoke Soldiers Home, and now we've seen what can happen. So I asked the residents of Northampton to join me in sending emails to Governor Baker, Senator Timilty, Representative Campbell, and Senator Rush to let them hear our voices demanding better care for our veterans in Western Mass. Their contact info, as well as information from this resolution, can be found on my Facebook page, or please email me or call if I can provide more information. And finally, I ask my fellow councilors to support this resolution and do much of the same. And again, like Councilor Labarge, in 2 readings tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Quinlan. Other councilors? Councilor Jarrett.
Yes, thank you to all of the sponsors of this resolution. I'm absolutely in favor of it. And I think we see many examples where the state promises to pay for something and then doesn't follow through. And charter school reimbursement is one example. And here's one that had deadly consequences. So this is one step in addressing this lack of accountability, and I'd like to do whatever we can to have the state follow through on this. Thanks.
Thank you. Councilor Thorpe.
Thank you. I'd like to thank Councilor Quinlan, Councilor Labarge, Mayor Narkowitz for bringing this resolution forward. This is a tragedy that should not have happened. And I appreciate the work you did on this, and I would definitely support this in 2 readings. I'd also like to thank those who also helped you, State Rep Lindsay Sabadosa, Steve Connor, and John Parody. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Nash, then Councilor Maori.
Thank you. Yeah, so I really appreciate the work done to bring this resolution forward. That, you know, in all that's been going on in the world, that in many ways for me, until I saw this resolution, this had kind of slipped by me. It was a huge tragedy just a few months ago, and that and continues to be, but that with all of the news and all of the changes that have been going on, it just kind of fell by the wayside. And I really appreciate that we're putting this front and center. This is something that's right. It's a service that should be provided for our veterans within the valley, and that that this was a terrible tragedy, and it was avoidable, that it's particularly tragic that these are people who put themselves in harm's way for the good of our nation, and that that we, by our negligence, put them in harm's way again. And that is very regrettable. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Maori.
Right. I think this is one of those pandemic stories, one of those horrendous tragedies that we have at a local level that none of us will soon forget. And I think we'll be processing it for years. I think it's so important. I really want to thank Councilor Quinlan and Councilor Labarge and all who worked on this, because it's not only an advocacy tool, but I think it's a tool for healing for the community, just kind of acknowledging it and calling it what it was, a largely preventable tragedy that we can't let happen again. So thank you so much.
Councilor Wheat, and then Councilor Labarge.
Yes, Mayor, I apologize because I also want to thank Mayor Narkowitz also for being a sponsor. Thank you.
Councilor Dwight.
I grew up in the shadow of the Holyoke Soldiers' Home. It actually literally was emblematic of Holyoke's pride, actually, when it was built. It sits there on top of the hill. You see it as well, back in the day, you come down Route 5, and it was the Citadel. Now in Route 91, you could see it as well. It was always a source of pride for the citizens of Holyoke, providing the services for the regional veterans. In this instance, of course, I mean, you know, I think Councilor Quinlan pointed out that the kind of, and Councilor Jarrett as well, the kind of parallels that we experience here in the western part of the state, particularly the city of Holyoke has experienced historically, which is essentially service outliers or problem where the region's more or less considered problematic and usually a second or an afterthought when more resources, more attention, and more conscious efforts are directed to everything within 128. The fact is that my initial emotion with this, and my sustaining emotion with this, is shame. This is a deep and abiding shame that this occurred, and it was so preventable. And usually, shame prompts apologies, and my hope here is that shame would drive action, the action that this resolution calls for, and I hope affects. And because I hope that we can actually prompt the shame that needs to be felt east of here. So thank you to every sponsor. John Parody and on John Parody's watch, the Holyoke Soldiers Home maintained that dignity, that emblematic resource in Holyoke that was important to Holyoke's sense of self. And he did it despite the fact that he was encumbered with enormous challenges and neglect. And the circumstances that found him no longer associated with it are another aspect of shame. And Steve Connor, saint among us, I'm grateful for all your efforts. And I do, as I said, I hope that we just don't sit here and in an empty fashion express outrage, but we actually can provoke and stimulate consequences, outcomes that actually do what we need to do. So thank you to all the sponsors. And I have no problem giving this 2 votes tonight.
Thank you. I'm going to recognize Steve Connor in a second, but he's going to indulge me and let me just also give my thanks for this resolution. And the horror and heartbreak of how COVID-19 ravaged the Soldiers Home just really laid bare what many knew, and that this resolution very well lays out, which is that for years, the state has failed the veterans at Holyoke Soldiers Home. And it culminated in this utter devastation, these tragic, lonely deaths, and the extreme trauma for their families who couldn't be with them and struggled to know what was happening with their loved one at the end. So I just want to join in thanking the sponsors and Steve Connor and John Parody, who as Councilor Joy just said, heartbreakingly knows firsthand how the state has failed the veterans with wholly inadequate resources and staffing and facilities. And I thank him and Steve for their work and their nonstop advocacy. And I'm sorry, and like Councilor Dwight, I'm ashamed that this could happen here in Massachusetts, and I join you all in demanding that we do far, far better. Mr. Connor, I'm going to unmute you. So there you go. Steve Connor, Director of Veterans Services. Thank you for being with us.
Hi, thank you. I don't want to take too much time on this. I just wanted to add that I'm very grateful to Councilor Quinlan and Councilor Barge for sponsoring this, and of course the mayor, fellow veteran in this. This has been tragic in so many ways for so many families, and I sat actually with John Parody a few weeks ago, and hearing families talk about what it was like to be on the outside watching what was happening to the loved ones on the inside. And it was heart-wrenching, down to the fact that one gentleman was 172 pounds, and 2 weeks later, he passed away, and he was about 93 pounds, if I'm remembering that correctly. That's neglect that should never have happened. It should never happen again. As a veteran service officer, I've been doing this job for over 16 years, and I have signed a lot of people up for admittance into the soldiers' home. And it was in the later years that I was getting more and more hesitant. As a matter of fact, we have an association of the Western Mass Veteran Service Officers who asked me to do a research project on the condition, because we had seen the money go to Chelsea and not to Holyoke, even though Holyoke had asked for it years ahead of time. So I did that work as best I could, and there was some huge telling signs that things were not going to be good. I had brought that to Representative Cocott, and he had done an initial quick audit, I think under Health and Human Services, and he said they're not seeing great disparities, but there seems to be a problem with overcrowding. Let's talk about it after the first of the year and see what more can happen. And of course, Peter, who I had gone to school with, had passed away, and we kept on, trying to fight the fight, but it gets under the back burner. What was so painful about what had happened was it was preventable. And I had helped not only the citizens of Northampton, their families helping the veterans get into the Holyoke Soldiers Home, but I have 10 other towns, and I had worked closely with 2 of the veterans from Northampton, helping them get in. Also veterans from Hadley, Chesterfield, Amherst. And it's really hard to deal with the fact that I helped somebody go in there and then they ended up dying in a very, not even unpleasant, a horrendous way. These men and women didn't deserve to be treated like this. It's painful. It's just painful. My brother passed away in 2013 at the Holyoke Soldiers Home. And I was amazed about how great the staff was in the care. We did notice the overcrowding, but the staff were, still like diligent about doing the best. And the ceremony that John Parody had mentioned, my brother my family got to experience when my brother was taken out of the soldiers' home with dignity. And I can tell you, after doing the report in 2017, and then when I was hanging out outside the soldiers' home when this all broke, and they weren't even being taken out the front door anymore. They were putting it in a refrigerator truck. It's crushing. And I hope you all can sponsor and can support this resolution. Not only should we not treat our veterans who have sacrificed so much before, but think about it. Most other places, this would be unheard of, but yet we had veterans living there who sacrificed again and again, and now at the end of their lives, because they wanted to be with other veterans, and they passed away in not the most pleasant deaths, as I had said. So thank you, and thank you for supporting having 2 readings today. We really want to get word to the state as soon as we can get it. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Councilors, any further comments or discussion? Mayor Narkowitz, as a sponsor, would you like an opportunity to speak?
I really can't add to all the eloquent words that have already been spoken tonight, but just again, thanks to my fellow co-sponsors, and obviously thanks to Steve and to John for their long-standing advocacy around the soldiers' home, and trying to raise the alarm many years ago. And I've had several occasions where they've worked with them to facilitate facilitate meetings with people, even in the last gubernatorial race, with candidates who were running for governor, to let them know what was happening at the Soldiers' Home. And we certainly have to make sure that something like this never happens again. And I'm grateful to the council for taking up this resolution. And I hope other cities and towns will follow suit. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Oh, Councillor Dwight.
I think it's appropriate also to acknowledge that not only the veterans, but the staff suffered during this time, and that the facility, the care that's provided is provided by the staff. The risks that are also assumed by the staff, and underpaid staff and overworked staff, and a staff that experience the same pains and agonies that we've heard described here. So the families were crushed. The veterans were crushed. The staff were crushed. Their families were crushed. A community was severely wounded by this egregious neglect that, in any other circumstance would be considered criminal, and maybe should be considered criminal here too.
Thank you for adding that. Okay. If there's no further discussion, Laura, can you take a roll call on a first reading, please?
Sure. Councillor Dwight,
Yes.
Councillor Foster,
Yes.
Councillor Jarrett,
Yes.
Councillor Labarge,
Yes.
Councillor Maori,
Oh, hold on.
I see her
Yes.
indicating yes. Okay. Councillor Nash,
Can't hear you.
Not saying anything. He's trying to unmute. Can you unmute? Why can't you unmute? Laura, can you click?
what do you want me to do? Try to unmute him? Councillor Nash, he's thumbs up or two thumbs up. That's a yes. Councillor Quinlan,
Yes.
Councillor Shara. Uh-oh. Councillor Shara, we may have lost. Perhaps that's why she was unable to unmute him.
Right.
Okay. I think, all right, so she's probably trying to rejoin right now.
You can consider it a pass. and then
Okay,
get back to our
go on to
rotation.
Councillor Thorpe.
Yeah.
Okay, so give her a few moments to see if she's able to come back.
Is she there?
Yeah, that's
Oh, there she is.
Yay!
Councillor Shara. We
I'm
gave
sorry,
you.
everybody. I'm so sorry. I don't know what to do about this Comcast situation. All right. I don't know where we were.
Okay, I went through the roll call. I passed because you had disappeared, but now
Yeah.
we're back to you, Councillor Shara.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay.
move to suspend rules to allow for a second reading.
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded to suspend rules. Any discussion on suspension of rules? Okay, hearing none, roll call on suspension of rules, please.
Councillor Foster,
Yes.
Councillor Jarrett,
Yes.
Councillor Labarge,
Yes.
Councillor Maori,
Yes.
Councillor Nash. Okay. This needs to be unmuted. Councillor Quinlan,
Yes.
Councillor Shara,
Yes.
Councillor Thorpe,
Yes.
and Councillor Dwight.
Yes.
Your rules are suspended.
Move second reading, please.
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded on a second reading. Any discussion on second reading? Hearing none, roll call, please.
Counselor Jarrett,
Yes.
Counselor Labarge,
Yes.
Counselor Maori,
Yes.
Counselor Nash,
Yes.
Counselor Quinlan,
Yes.
Counselor Shara,
Yes.
Counselor Thorpe,
Yes.
Counselor Dwight,
Yes.
and Counselor Foster.
Yes.
That
Thank
passes in
you,
two readings.
counselors.
Yeah,
Thank
so much.
you very much.
Okay.
Okay, moving on to our next resolution. It's a resolution in support of actions to combat the public health crisis of systemic racism. Let me open it up. Okay, so this is in the year 2020 upon the recommendation of Councilor Louise Shara, Councilor William H. Dwight, Councilor John T. Thorpe, R 20.107, a resolution in support of and committing to actions at the federal, state, and local level to combat the public health crisis of systemic racism. Be it resolved by the City Council of the City of Northampton in City Council assembled as follows. Whereas George Floyd, an unarmed African-American man, was asphyxiated by the Minneapolis police officers on May 25th, 2020. And whereas Breonna Taylor, an African-American emergency room technician, was shot 8 times and killed in her home by Louisville police on March 13th, 2020. And whereas Ahmaud Arbery, an African-American man, was shot and killed by 2 white civilian men while jogging through a South Georgia neighborhood on February 23rd, 2020. And whereas Mr. Floyd's, Ms. Taylor's, and Mr. Arbery's deaths and the manner of their deaths are yet more examples in a list of countless examples of an endemic culture of oppression and racism that exists in our country. And whereas the widespread revulsion demonstrated by our fellow citizens to this, and to all of the accumulated historical racist actions, requires a reckoning and a commitment from all of us to confront this greatest threat to our society. And whereas in the absence of presidential leadership, it is incumbent upon local authorities to respond to the suffering that racism inflicts. Whereas we continue to acknowledge the deaths chronicled in this resolution and all of the racially perpetrated deaths that preceded them, as well as the racial violence and state and federal violence throughout the country that has followed them. And whereas the City Council of Northampton has for decades decried and condemned by resolution and laws the myriad racist acts committed by individuals and persons in authority. And whereas the City Council of Northampton will continue to stand unified in our commitment to confront institutional racism, implicit bias, and bigotry in all forms and violence. Whereas on May 29th, 2020, the American Public Health Association declared racism an ongoing public health crisis. And on June 7th, 2020, the American Medical Association stated that racism is an urgent threat to public health. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the City Council of Northampton reasserts its unequivocal opposition to expressions and acts of hate. And be it further resolved that we will devote our efforts to expanding the challenging but necessary community conversation on racism and on all of our respective culpabilities. And be it further resolved that we call for increased resources from the Commonwealth for comprehensive anti-racism trainings for state and municipal employees and students. And be it further resolved that the Northampton City Council supports the Massachusetts Black and Latino Legislative Caucus's proposed 10-point plan to combat systemic racism in policing and police brutality, stating that at the federal level to pass Congresswoman Presley's resolution to condemn police brutality, racial profiling, and the excessive use of force, to improve oversight and independent investigations to hold individual law enforcement officers and police departments accountable. 3, for the Department of Justice, that the Department of Justice must reassert its statutory authority to investigate individual instances of racial profiling, police brutality, and violence, and investigate and litigate individual law enforcement officers and police departments routinely violating civil rights. 4, to adopt sound and unbiased law enforcement policies at all levels of government that reduce the disparate impact of police brutality, racial profiling, and use of force on Black and Brown people and other historically marginalized communities. At the state level, 5, to resolve to provide for a, quote, special commission on peace officer standards and training, unquote, to study and make recommendations concerning the implementation of a statewide peace officer standards and training post system. that's H2146, to certify police officers and enable decertification for misconduct and abuse. 6, to pass an act to reform civil service exams, H2292, establishing an Office of Diversity and Equal Opportunity to establish guidelines and review for diversity plans for all agencies, establish a police officer exam advisory board to review examinations for appointment and promotion of peace officers. 7, pass an act establishing a Commission on Structural Racism, H1440, establishing a commission to study how the systemic presence of institutional racism has created a culture of structural racial inequality, which has exacerbated disproportionate minority contact with the criminal justice system in Massachusetts. 8, to adopt clear statutory limits on police use of force, including chokeholds and other tactics known to have deadly consequences. Require independent investigation of officer-related deaths, require data collection and reporting on race regarding all arrests and police use of force by every department. At the municipal level, 9, to declare racism is a public health crisis and worthy of treatment, assessment, and financial investment in order to eradicate negative health impacts. 10, create a civil review board or commission with subpoena power to investigate allegations of law enforcement wrongdoing. The Northampton City Council acknowledges the steps that the Northampton Police Department has previously taken that align with the plan, including use of force policies and prohibiting chokeholds. And we expect the city to combat systemic racism in our municipality and policing. We support the work of the Northampton Policing Review Commission created on July 9, 2020 to study and make informed recommendations for change to the city's approach to policing. Be it further resolved that the Northampton City Council strongly agrees that racism and public health needed.
Starting to lose you, Councilor Chiara.
Oh dear.
Do you want me? I could finish reading the resolution while
Yeah.
Council Shara. Okay. So be it further resolved, the Northampton City Council strongly agrees that racism is a public health crisis. And in addition to asking to declare it so at the municipal level, ask the Commonwealth to devote the resources needed to combat this crisis at both the state and local levels. And be it further resolved that the administrative assistant shall cause a copy of this resolution to be delivered to Governor Charles Baker, Attorney General Maura Healey, Senators Elizabeth Warren and Edward Markey, Congressman James McGovern, Massachusetts Senator Joe Comerford, and Massachusetts Representative Lindsay Savadosa, and the chair of the NBLLC, Representative Carlos Gonzalez, and the commissioner of the Massachusetts Department of Public Health, Dr. Monica Barrell, and then Northampton Director of Public Health, Meredith O'Leary.
Thank you, Councilor Dwight. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. Thank you very much for hitting. Okay, is there a motion, please?
I'll make a
To
motion.
approve, please. I'll second it.
The motion's been made by Councilor Foster, seconded by Councilor Dwight. Discussion, would one of the sponsors like to lead off? Councilor Thorpe?
Thank you, Councilor Sierra. I can tell you that I've heard from some of my constituents who have been very supportive of this resolution and who wanted to see the 10-point plan added and wanted us to acknowledge that racism is a public health crisis. This is a long and overdue response to something people already knew, but have been reluctant to really acknowledge that racism is a problem that hurts people, specifically Black and other people of color. There are statistics that show Black and other people of color experiencing worse health issues and disparities, police violence, lack of equal access to income, wealth, and access to healthy food, to name a few. This is a small step, but a small step in the right direction. And I really want to thank City Council President Gina Louise Sierra and Bill Dwight for their guidance and leadership in crafting this resolution with me. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Dwight, would you like to speak?
Sure, why not? We actually, this resolution's been much changed actually since we first started. The events move faster than our ability to keep up with it. And this was actually drafted originally to respond to the death of George Floyd, which was quite a while ago now. There have been subsequent deaths that racially motivated deaths, essentially in many cases, would qualify as lynchings. We have not moved very far, as we all come to acknowledge now. I think the vast majority, at least polls indicate that starting to recognize that in the course of us being essentially all experiencing house arrest for 4.5, 5 months, that the explosion that occurred of people's level of despair and outrage of the consequences of racism that are part of the warp and weave of the fabric of this country. It is racism actually is an integral part of what we are as a nation. And we are now forced at long last to start to reckon with this in a very serious way with the support of the majority of the people in this country. That's unprecedented. The civil rights movement, which was not that long ago, as it started, John Lewis just recently died, but John Lewis, at the time, his experience fighting for the rights, just simple, basic, elemental rights, resulted in him having a fractured skull and resulted in him continually experiencing the abuse that he actually put himself in peril each time he went to advocate for his people. But he also described it as our people, we, us, all of us. I spoke earlier of the fact that the shame is the primary driver in the Soldiers' Home response. Shame here it's not a strong enough word. It doesn't qualify, it doesn't encompass the level and depth of pain and the consequences experienced by the people who have endured as part of our system the long suffering oppression that they experience today. So this is actually, as someone has pointed out before, we have written multiple resolutions opposing hate, and resolutions, of course, do not carry the weight of a law. They don't have any authority other than the voice of the council unified, hopefully. Insofar as we actually, what this charges us to do is to continue to do the work part. There's advocating, there's speaking out, there's marching, there's demonstrating, and that actually moves the conversation. That moves the center of gravity of where the conversation is held. But then our job, the job of elected officials, of public servants, is to review and reconsider what it means, what public safety in this instance means to us. What is public safety? Who are the public? And beyond that, it's not just the public safety response, it is everything else. It is the universe of our culture, and we have to do that hard work. We make laws, that is one of our responsibilities as counselors. We make local municipal laws. We don't make sweeping laws that affect everyone, but we can do our part for here. This is our charge. And I have no doubt, I have been able to recently experience the core of my colleagues here. They are moral people, devoted to the notion of public service. And they will, and I fully confident will continue to make moral choices. And so this is a reinforcement for that. I mean, for people who are frustrated by the fact that this doesn't essentially effectively do anything, doesn't create a law. It does charge us, the council, to follow through and manifest actions by our declaration. So I have every confidence that this will meet with unanimous approval. And I am receptive to amendments also. I mean, this is not comprehensive by any stretch, but I'm grateful to my co-sponsors very much so for their ethic and their consciences. So thank you.
Thank you. I'll just follow up and echo a lot of what Councillor Dwight just said, though less eloquently than him as always. And I just, I'll say that, we felt it was important to reintroduce this resolution that we had started to introduce in June, as Councillor Dwight said, that was in response to the killing of George Floyd by police. But then we held it back to incorporate some of the responses happening here in Northampton at the state level and nationally. And, notably here in Northampton, the creation of the Policing Review Commission, which we've been working on building this summer, and will start their work early in the fall. And also, as Councillor Dwight said, as noted in the resolution, the City Council has a long history of forcefully standing against racism and bigotry and hate. And this resolution joins those declarations. But I feel it's important, as he said, to talk about the actions with the words, and also to assert our stand with the Massachusetts Black and Latino Legislative Caucus and our support for their 10-point plan. So I also want to thank my sponsors for all the work that they've done on this now for many months, and especially also thank Adele Franks and Stephen Jones for their advocacy and their commitment to this 10-point plan, and specifically to declaring racism as a public health crisis. Stephen's comments this evening, and very much for delivering the news that the Board of Health voted today to recognize racism as a public health crisis. I thank him for telling us that, and I thank the board for taking that step. But I just want to very forcefully say that I think it's critical that it be done at the state level with a commitment of resources, as would be in crisis. And I just want to under the interest of current health crises. And I'm confused. Can you guys hear me?
Breaking up.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm gonna try and push through. The intersection of these two crises that we are experiencing right now, and the part that systemic racism plays in general in public health, and that the numbers are continuing to grow with the coronavirus crisis, that Black and Latinx communities have significantly higher rates of coronavirus positive cases, hospitalization, and mortality from the virus. So we have to acknowledge that racism is a public health crisis, and it is if not cause of other public health crises, it is the cause of some other public health crises, but it very much exacerbates for certain communities other crises. So I hope the council will support this resolution and join me and Councillor Thorpe and Councillor Dwight in pushing for these actions. And I thank them so much for their work on it. Councillor Thorpe, did you have something else you wanted to say?
Yes, I just wanted to add, touch upon what Councillor Dwight had mentioned earlier, if you don't mind. Is that okay?
Please.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Dwight, just want to touch upon what you said earlier about the City Council creating municipal laws, and that is true, but we also as a City Council have to make sure that those laws that we implement are inclusive of everybody and fair, and that it doesn't cause inequities and is unjust to Black, Indigenous, and people of color. So we have a duty in doing that, and I just wanted to make that known. Thank you.
Thank you. Other comments? Councilor Jarrett.
Thank you. I'm very much in support of this. And the work on public safety is essential. I just wanted to speak, and I know Councilor Dwight and Councilor Thorpe just spoke briefly to this in terms of the laws. So I wanted to speak to the concrete action that we could take that's under the purview of the council. I know that many municipalities can conduct a periodic review of their ordinances to see what needs updating. And I would suggest that we look at ordinances to see how they impact people differently depending on their race, what impact that has on health and economics, employment, general well-being. So I think it's not just about looking at an ordinance and saying, okay, is this ordinance racist or not? But it's about looking at what the effect it has, and is there a disparate impact on different groups of people. One example is zoning. And, early zoning codes were often explicitly racist. Single family zoning and minimum lot sizes were often used to require more money to afford to live in a place. I think, it's not intentional today, but there could still be that effect. And if it costs more money, that can make it less accessible to people of color. Environmental racism means some neighborhoods are healthier than others, and just looking at how does this affect access to healthcare, to jobs, to healthy food, to outdoor exercise. So I wonder if the sponsors would consider adding something of that additional scope or a request in that for the second reading. And then also, Councilor Shara, one option that may work for audio is to call in and connect the audio. That way your audio would be consistent even if your video and others did drop out.
Oh, thank you for that suggestion. Although my phone audio's been acting up too.
Yeah.
I might give that a try. Thank you. Councilor Dwight, and is that in response to Councilor Jarrett? Yes, please. Okay.
Actually, I'd be very open to that. I think that's an excellent idea. I think zoning is an interesting example and appropriate. I believe zoning was invented in Massachusetts, so but we're actually charged with periodic review. We're required to do periodic review of our ordinances, but I like the idea of somehow embedding in that a criteria of analysis that addresses that. I mean, I don't think that as a rule that they've been reviewed in that way. I mean, if it came up and it was overt, I'm sure it would. We have done it certainly in the past when I was first a counselor. We responded to Supreme Court decisions, for instance, relative to loitering, which was to condemn loitering turns out to be unconstitutional. The same thing, I think we're going to have to do some kind of review relative to political signage and things like that. So I think, and if you are interested in drafting an amendment to that effect, that'd be great. Or if you want me to try and cobble something, but I do think that's an excellent idea.
Yes. Yeah, periodic review of ordinances is actually, I saw someone else's hand before. Councilor Maori, then Councilor Quinlan.
Yes, I want to thank Councilor Shara, Councilor Thorpe, Councilor Dwight for this. I've been a longtime advocate of using a public health declaration like this ever since when I was in grad school for public health, because with multidimensional issues like this, I saw it in other issues like violence and women's health, where this was a great way of framing it for those who want to address it, and it really gets the impact as people have alluded to versus just intent, which sometimes intent is fine, but then there's an impact. And it's, of course, not just about violence at the hands of police or COVID-19, maternal health, or scores of other health health indicators. We see it, of course, in housing and food deserts, education, and jobs. So I think it's really it's actually quite practical thing to do. It's acknowledging a problem, and it's also inviting accountability by doing so. And it's also something that the more communities and the more levels of government that do it help establish community norms and standards for us all to live up to. So I think it's actually a very grounded thing to do, and I really appreciate you doing it. I'd love to hear if sponsors want to talk a little bit about 9 and 10. I'm curious are you envisioning that the Policing Review Commission would kind of explore some of those? It seems like a good venue to explore the municipal level endeavors, but yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Quinlan.
Thank you, and thank you very much, of course, to the sponsors. This is as you've all pointed out, is something that the City Council of Northampton, and I believe the city population as at whole, would be in agreement with, and I support 100%. Something came to me as I was listening here, and one is this would be my only suggestion to this, having agreeing with what Councilor. What?
We lost you.
We missed this part of your sentence. You agreeing with Councilor Maori? No.
I do agree with Councilor Jarrett and Councilor Maori in their proposal. But I would also mention that I noticed in number 6 that we're talking about encouraging a state office of diversity and equal opportunity. And while it's not necessarily the council's purview to create an office, I do think we could do that here in Northampton as well. Encourage the mayor to look into an office of diversity and equal opportunity. And it just, the whole kind of concept of that made me think of listening in the last session to the previous council when they were, discussing the Safe Cities Ordinance. And that at that time, there were a couple of councilors, and I think Councilor Klein was really kind of the loudest voice about it at the moment, in saying, we're going to pass this ordinance, but what's the accountability? How do we know about this? How do we know that these things are going to be enforced? And so that came into my mind as I look and think, I'm honored to be part of the Police Review Commission. I'm really excited for the opportunity to kind of dig into what we can do better. And I think maybe an office like that in this city here would help us clarify some of the rules and regulations and accountability. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Councilor Dwight and Councilor Nash.
Just a quick response on item number 6. Actually, Northampton, this is to pass an act to reform civil service exams, and basically who qualifies for a lot of police departments across the state. Northampton actually, under the guidance of former Chief Sinkowitz, withdrew from civil service, principally civil service and civil service exams, principally for a number of reasons having to do with the complications of what qualified for police officers. People that, by agreement, if you were part of civil service, that you had to take over candidates you would prefer. And to give you an example, I sat on an interview committee with one candidate who actually had pending felony charges, but who qualified, who ranked higher on civil service exam and would have qualified for being a police officer in the city of Northampton. Chief Sinkowitz was frustrated by this, and also the fact that we lost locality. We lost the ability to focus on police officers who lived locally, knew the area. So that dimension, that's separate from what Councilor Quinlan was talking about, and I don't think that's a bad idea. I think that's a good idea. I just want to point out that Northampton, as far as the civil service exams, should the civil service exams evolve into something far more progressive and far more thoughtful, then I think Northampton should reconsider that. But right now, it is deeply problematic for having qualified officers who would meet the criteria that are higher standards, and we do have much higher standards than many departments in the state. So worth noting. That's all.
Thank you.
You next?
Sorry. I'm now in two places at once. I can hear myself in multiple. Who was raising their hand?
That was Councilor Nash.
Counselor Foster.
We've lost both of you.
How's the municipal owned internet study going?
It's, we are.
Do you think we need
We are
it?
making advances. We are
Yeah.
making considerable advances, and it can't come too soon.
This is like what Ashfield must be dealing with all the time.
That's true. The hill towns.
Yep.
All right.
You back?
I don't know.
You are.
We can hear you. We hear you.
Okay. Whoever's raising their hand, speak.
It was Councilor Nash was next.
I'm going to go next. So first of all, I want to acknowledge the sponsors here. I want to thank you for all of the hard work that's gone into this. We've seen it develop over the last few months, and I think it's become a better resolution. As Councilor Shara was reading it into the record, I found myself very moved by, the loss of life, and also that our commitment to making profound change. That we have our policing review committee that's coming down the pike, that we have a chief of police who's very interested in working with us on bringing about change, that there's measures before at the State House that are being weighed right now to make changes. I always appreciate when we are referencing anything going on at the State House with our resolution. I want to also applaud the inclusion of the 10-point plan from the Black and Latino Caucus. That I realize that's kind of hot off the press because that was in the works over the summer, and that I appreciate all of those great ideas that are listed there. And that lastly, I want to say that I think that viewing this as a public health crisis really broadens our discussion beyond, we've been looking at it in terms of our policing and how policing needs to be repaired, and how the way we provide our public safety needs to be repaired. But underneath it all, that there is a sickness that we all have socially that is impairing people. And that what I really like about that public health piece is that it's something we can all take on, that we all need to work on. So I'm going to be supporting this 100%. And I think it's a great positive kickoff to the work that we're going to be doing over the next year around looking at our public safety. So thank you to the sponsors, especially thank you to Councilor Thorpe for his leadership and in bringing this resolution about. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Councilor Foster, please.
Thank you, Councilor Shara. Similar, I'd like to thank the sponsors for bringing this resolution forward. And, I've witnessed the evolution of the resolution as it's been on the agenda, and I really appreciate seeing the 10-point plan from the Black and Latino Caucus and the declaration of racism as a public health crisis. I think, echoing things that I've heard is we have to name the problem, and then that provides us a framework for addressing it, but we have to be able to stand up and name it. And I'm just struck, as we're discussing, and I'm not sure that my thoughts are 100% formed around this, but I'm struck how in Holyoke, the planned foreclosure of the birthing center, and we know that maternal mortality is significantly higher in Black and Latino communities. And yet the framework we might have here is that the Department of Public Health is saying that the birthing center in Holyoke is a community need. And there's action and discussion moving forward on that. And I think that the frame of considering racism in public health discussions is a development that's long overdue and one that can make tremendous outcomes. We know that the impact of racism, it's not a day or a year or even one person. The impact is felt for generations. And so, I will proudly support this resolution. And I recognize that naming the problem is one step. And I believe that my colleagues here on council are committed, and as well as city leadership that I've seen taking this one step. And then, there's work to be done as well beyond it.
Thank you. Councilor Labarge.
Yes, I want to apologize because this was not in my packet when I picked it up on Tuesday, late afternoon. And this is the first time that I've seen this, but I am very honored with it. You can tell that there's a lot of time that has been put into this resolution. And I agree with what I'm hearing this evening from counselors. I think that definitely, and a lot of the research that I have done with some friends on racism is definitely a health issue. There's no question about it. I like the part about what Alex Jarrett mentioned about the zoning part of it with housing and so forth. You do your research, you read about that. But I want to thank the 3 sponsors for doing such a great job of the language on here. And change is change, and it's there. It's written in there. And I will support this 100%. And I'm wondering if the sponsors would like 2 readings on this evening.
Thank you. I don't think that's necessary, but thank you.
No.
You don't want 2 readings?
No, I think, I'm sorry, I'm speaking out of turn. But as we've heard possible recommendations from Councilors Jarrett and Quinlan, like the opportunity to massage this a little more and bring it back in a couple of weeks as we start our regular sessions again, and see if we can improve upon it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the offer, though.
Yes. Are there any other comments?
Councilor Skater?
Yes.
I'd like to mention one more thing. I even though I was not at the hearing for the Public Health Department, it was good to hear from the public comment from Steve that the resolution was on the resolution announcing that racism is a public health emergency, that their resolution passed this evening. So that was good to hear. So I want to thank the Public Health Department. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Okay, seeing none, roll call, please.
Councilor Labarge.
Yes.
Councilor Maori.
Yes.
Councilor Nash.
Yes.
Councilor Quinlan.
Yes.
Councilor Shara.
Yes.
Councilor Thorpe.
Yes.
Councilor Dwight.
Yes.
Councilor Foster.
Yes.
And Councilor Jarrett.
Yes.
Okay, that passes in first reading. Thank you. Before we get to the consent agenda, Laura, can you unmute me where it says Councilor Shara? Because the ultimate of poetic justice, I can't unmute myself.
Oh, goodness.
Sorry.
Make it echoey.
You know, in the participant list, your peer is unmuted. So is there 2 of you on?
Yes,
There's 2 of me.
Okay, wait a minute. Oh, I
I'm
see.
trying to
Okay,
hear,
gotcha.
yeah, because I'm on the phone and I'm also through the computer.
Okay,
I
I unmuted the second one of you, I
Okay.
believe. Did it work? No, it didn't. Wait, try again.
Okay.
I hit
It
unmute.
doesn't.
Trying to unmute.
Yeah. I'm hanging up on myself right there. Hold on. I was stuck in some kind of loop where Laura, I would unmute and said the host has muted you and you cannot unmute yourself. And then it would say, would you like to unmute? And then it wouldn't unmute me. And it just is an endless circle of me hearing myself saying things over and over again. So I'm just gonna go back to this. I'm so sorry, everybody. If anyone has other ideas for me, let me know. Okay, so we're up to the consent agenda. I'm going to read through it. Hopefully, I will make it through it. And then I will ask if there are any removals for discussion, because there's no discussion on the consent agenda. Okay, so first up, we have the minutes of June 4th, June 18th, and June 9th. Then we have, these are appointments. Oh, I'm so sorry, July, yes, July 9th. So June 4th, June 18th, July 9th, 2020. 20.097, these are appointments to various committees. They've all received a positive recommendation from the Committee on City Services. And they are for the Board of Registrars, Daniel Polachek at 335 South Street. This is a reappointment, term of April 2020 to March 2023. Next is Downtown Business Architecture Committee, Aylin Tierney, 30 Francis Street, term July 2020, July 2023. It's a reappointment. Human Rights Commission, Booker Bush, MD, 119 Pine Street in Florence, term July 2020, June 2023, also a reappointment. Next is the License Commission, Helen Kahn, 188 Federal Street in Florence, term July 2020 to June 2026, a reappointment. Next is Parks and Recreation Commission, James Ryan, 56 Leonard Street in Leeds, July 2020 to June 2023 is the term. It's a reappointment. Next is 20.098, petitions for annual secondhand dealer licenses. Renewal licenses for the following: Cumberland Rare Books at 9.5 Market Street. The petitioner is Hosea Baskin. Sun Music, LLC, DBA Birdhouse Music, 164 Main Street. Petitioner Glenn Alper. Born Again Vintage and Consignment, 4 Old South Street. Can you guys still hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Feedback on my end. Okay. Petitioner is Laura Burke, 4 Old South Street. Then Phoenix Rising, 5 Old South Street. Petitioner Robert Templeton. Next, we have 20.099 applications for 6 taxi cab licenses applied by Ford by Jeffrey Miller and Cosmic Cab. Applications for permits for taxi cabs for the following vehicles: 2001 Chevy Suburban, 2005 Chevy Magnum, 2007 Chevy Suburban, 2008 Dodge Caravan, 2008 Black Dodge Caravan, 2008 PT Cruiser. Then 20.106, appointments to various committees. This is for referral to the City Services Committee. For the Arts Council, Matthew Vanderslice, 231 Elm Street Rear. The term is July 2020 to June 2023. This is to fill a vacancy. Next is Lori Steiner, also for the Arts Council, 15 Ridgewood Terrace, term July 2020, June 2023. This is a reappointment. Next, these are to the Board of Health. Dr. Suzanne Smith, 134 State Street, July 2020 to June 2023, a reappointment. This is for the Conservation Commission, Kevin Lake at 35 Washington Avenue. The term is for July 2020 to June 2023. It's a reappointment. Downtown Business Architecture Committee, Emily Wright at 244 South Street, term July 2020 to June 2023 to fill a vacancy. Human Rights Commission, Nural Mohammed, 34 Michaelman Avenue, Apartment 2. Term July 2020 to June 2023. That's a reappointment. To the Human Rights Commission, also Deirdre Cuffey Gray, 2 Burt's Pit Road. This the term is August 2020 to June 2023, and that is to fill a vacancy. Chelsea Villarreal, 23A Lyman Road, term August 2020 to June 2023, and that is to fill a vacancy.
Move approval of the consent agenda, please.
Second it.
So first, are there any removals? I know Councillor Foster, you wanted to say something.
Yeah, so there's no discussion on the consent agenda. So do I need to remove an item if I need to say something about it, or can I say it before we move approval?
How about you remove the item?
Okay, then I'd like to remove the appointment of Helen Kahn to the Licensing Commission from the consent agenda.
Okay, any other removals? Okay, so hearing none, the motion was made and seconded, yes?
Yes.
So let's approve the consent agenda minus that removal, which is the reappointment of Helen Kahn to the License Commission. Roll call, please, on approving the consent agenda minus the removal.
Councillor Maori,
Hold on.
Sorry.
Okay.
Yes.
yes. Councillor Nash,
Yes.
Councillor Quinlan,
Yes.
Councillor Shara,
Yes.
Councillor Thorpe,
Yes.
Councillor Dwight,
Yes.
Councillor Foster,
Yes.
Councillor Jarrett,
Yes.
and Councillor Labarge.
Yes.
Okay. Consent agenda has been approved, and now we're going to take up the License Commission, the appointment of Helen Kahn to the License Commission. So, Councillor Foster.
We'll have to move approval to put it on the floor first.
Okay.
I move to approve.
Motion was made, and who seconded?
Councilor Nash.
Councillor Nash. Discussion, Councillor Foster?
Yeah, so I just wanted to name that there could be the appearance of a conflict. As you know, I'm the executive director of All Out Adventures, and Helen Kahn is my employee. That being said, I don't have any financial interest in her appointment and feel I can vote fairly. I just wanted to name that appearance of a conflict.
Thank you very much for doing that. Okay, any further discussion on this appointment, reappointment? Okay, hearing none, roll call, please.
Okay. Councillor Nash,
Yes.
Councillor Quinlan,
Yes.
Councillor Shara,
Yes.
Councillor Thorpe. Councillor Thorpe, was that a yes?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Dwight,
Yes.
Councillor Foster,
Yes.
Councillor Jarrett,
Yes.
Councillor Labarge,
Yes.
Councillor Maori.
Yes.
Very good.
Okay, great, thank you. We are now going to recess for the Committee on Finance. So, welcome to the Committee on Finance. Laura, when you are ready, could you please call the roll for Finance?
Sure. Councillor Labarge,
Present.
Councillor Quinlan,
Present.
Councillor Shara,
Here.
and Councillor Thorpe.
Here.
Okay, first item is approval of minutes from the previous meeting. This is minutes for July 9th, 2020.
Move to approve.
Second.
Motion's been made by Councillor Labarge, seconded by Councillor Thorpe. Any discussion? Hearing none, roll call, please.
Councillor Labarge,
Yes.
Councillor Quinlan,
Yes.
Councillor Shara,
Yes.
and Councillor Thorpe.
Yes.
Okay. Our next item is the fourth quarter financial report from Finance Director Susan Wright. So this is the last quarter of the previous fiscal year. And Susan is joining us. Hi. So welcome, Susan.
Hello, good evening.
Good evening. Would you go through these for us?
Sure. I'm going to start with the general fund revenues. And this is the fourth quarter, so this is pretty much the closeout of fiscal 2020, which of course ended June 30th. So we'll look at the general fund section taxes and excise first. I'm just going to point out the highlights, the things that jump out at me as having changed significantly. One way or another from a prior year. So real estate tax revenue, you can see that we brought in 58.9 million, and that remaining to be collected was 1.4. Now, last year, our outstanding real estate tax revenue was only $500,000. So this tells me that there was some difficulty for some of our taxpayers to make their real estate payments on time, because this is, about 539 last year was the outstanding, this year 1.4. So that is significant. The next line I'd like to look at is motor vehicle excise. We brought in 2.7 million. Last year, we also brought in 2.7 million. So that line seemed unaffected by the pandemic. The next categories, hotel, motel, and meals, are definitely categories that were impacted by the pandemic. We did bring in 764,000 in hotel motel. However, the fourth quarter of 2020 brought in 89,920, and the prior year, the fourth quarter had brought in 145,000. So we were down about $56,000 in the fourth quarter for hotel motel. For meals, the fourth quarter in 2020, we brought in 77.5. However, the quarter before the fourth quarter last year, we brought in 184. So we were down 106,000 in meals tax. So those are some pretty significant numbers. I will point out that up until the fourth quarter, hotel motel tax was way above last year. We were about 100,000 more than we were last year for hotel and motels. So we were doing very good in the first three quarters. I do want to remind everybody the fourth quarter payment for hotel motel and for meals represents February, March, and April. So the pandemic kind of hit mid-March. So you can see that those numbers reflect what we probably brought in February and the beginning of March, and then things, definitely tailed off. In terms of the adult marijuana excise, we had anticipated 1.2 million when we were making that estimate last year. Remember, we only had one quarter, actually 2 quarters of marijuana revenue. It was all very new at that point, and we weren't sure what kind of market share Northampton would sustain. We did bring in 1.64 million in FY20, but I do want to point out that the fourth quarter, I'll read the 4 quarters for 2020 for the marijuana revenue, and you'll see that there was quite a dip. So the first quarter of 2020 was 535. Second quarter was 444. The third quarter was 389, and the fourth quarter was 271. So between our first and second quarter, we dropped 90,000. Between our second and third quarter, we dropped 55,000. And between our third and fourth quarter, we dropped 118,000. So we're definitely seeing a couple of things happening here. One, we are seeing a decrease in our market share. 2, if you remember, there was a ban on vaping that happened in late fall last year. So that also had an impact on this. And 3rd, we know at least for a portion of the time that Netta was, during the shutdown, Netta was shut down completely. So there's a number of things that are going on here, and it does make kind of predicting what our marijuana revenue is going to be going forward a little more challenging, factoring in all of those different things. But we did bring in 1.6 in FY20. For the rest of the this particular category, taxes and excise, everything came in as planned. All of the pilot payments came in. You'll see a 0 for the landfill solar array. That money has come in, that 10,000. It just hasn't been booked yet. So I'm going to move on to parking, and this is where we did take a fairly large hit. Normally, we bring in about $2 million a year in parking, and we estimate using 1.8 million to support the budget. So in FY20, we budgeted and you voted to take from receipt reserves 1.85 million. We didn't bring that in. We actually brought in about 1.2, 1.3. We were 363,000 short on our 1.8 million that we had planned to use in the budget. But in actuality, we lost because we bring in 2 million, we budget 1.8, and the additional 200,000 always goes into the receipt reserve for capital expenditures. This is how we pay for repairs to the garage. This is how we buy new kiosks and make improvements to our parking system. So we did not bring in 1.8. We were 363 short. We also didn't bring in that 200 that usually goes over to receipt reserve. So the fourth quarter overall for the year, parking was down 553,000 over last year. We were down 27% in the fourth for the whole year. So when you look at these parking numbers, they all look like we brought in exactly what we budgeted. The reason is you vote to take a certain amount from receipt reserve. So when that comes in over that amount, as it does every other year, the excess goes into receipt reserve. However, this year, because we didn't meet our target, but we voted to use that much from receipt reserve, we have to take the money out. So we ended up moving 363,000 out of receipt reserves into the general fund to make up for that revenue. This leaves still 1,038,000 in the receipt reserve for parking. So we're still in good shape there, but we would have had 363 more in there, plus another 200,000 if we had not had this problem. So overall though, I think what's significant is that we usually bring in 2 million in parking and we lost over last year 553. So parking, as you know, was shut down in mid-March when we closed city offices, and parking resumed August 3rd this year. So the next category, the next section after parking that I want to talk about is ambulance services. When the mayor and I spoke with you in April of this year, at the beginning of the pandemic, calls had dropped off precipitously in the fire rescue department. No one was taking the ambulance. Also, all the insurance companies basically closed, so no payments were coming in. So we were anticipating a loss in ambulance revenue. However, actually, ambulance revenue picked up dramatically after the beginning of April. And we started getting money in from the insurance companies. So we ended up bringing in 2.2 million, which is a little bit more than we brought in last year. We had 5,263 calls, which was actually about 89 calls less than last year, but we brought in more money than last year. And the reason, according to the chief, is that most of the runs were more intensive. They were more advanced life support, which bring in more money than basic life support or just transports. So we did bring in quite a bit more this year in ambulance. The next section of revenues that I want to talk to you about is fees for the collector. You can see that we did not meet our target. We had budgeted 119. We only brought in 62.6. So we were short by 56,000. And this is basically because once we shut down, legislation from the state allowed us to delay payment of all fees to the city until June 30th without any fees. And we adopted that. So taxpayers were given extra time without penalties to make their payments up until June 30th. So we did not get demand fees and other fees that we would normally get. Another item here is Smith Voc tuition. You can see that they were short about $5,988. That actually will be made up from their tuition revolving fund, because that operates a lot kind of like parking. There's an amount that comes in, we vote it, they need to provide it. anything excess, if it comes in more than they anticipated, that goes into their tuition revolving fund. If it comes in less, they have to take money out of the tuition revolving fund. So that's another journal entry that still needs to be done. If you go to the next section, the licenses and permits, there was a significant drop in revenue in this section. The building inspector, plumbing, wiring, weights and measures, periodic inspections, and sidewalk signs. Those 6 categories together total $669,000. Last year, those 6 categories were $872,000. So they're about 75% of what they were last year. So we got about $202,000 less in permits. And that's most likely because because the pandemic did slow down building for quite a while, and it's taken a while for it to start back up again. The next category that I'd like to draw attention to is state revenue. There's a couple of things here. The first category, abatement for vets, blind, and surviving spouses. We're still waiting for that money to come in. We have filed the report, but the state has yet to send us our money. So I do anticipate somewhere between $50,000 and $60,000 still coming in there. And then if you look at charter school aid, we did not receive as much as we had been anticipating, but the flip side of that is that charter school outgoing tuition was also down, and I'll talk about that on the expense side. But overall, charter school outgoing tuition was down $464,000, so that was good. We paid out $464,000 less, or $464,000 less than we thought. So we did get less aid because we had less students. Skipping down to the next section, parking tickets. Well, with the shutdown of the parking system, you can imagine parking tickets also took a hit, although we did continue to get some revenue from outstanding tickets. Tickets were down for the year, 135,338. So tickets were down 16%. And while parking was down almost 25%, as I said, some tickets payments did come in after we shut down. If you go down to the miscellaneous section, the interest on investments, this was one category where we got a lot more than we anticipated, and I think that's because of the craziness happening in the stock market. Last year, we brought in $227,000. We budgeted $196,000, and we brought in $305,000. So our investments did very well. Miscellaneous receipts, you see another $283,000. That is mostly, we had some Chapter 90 account that we had reconciled that had been needing to be reconciled for a while, and the excess, $123,000, came into the general fund, but we actually voted that out in free cash to road projects. Another big item in that category was E-rate reimbursement, and again, we voted that out to the schools. And then lastly, this 283, there were quite a few host community fees from grants brought in by the health department. So if you go to the end, overall, we did meet, we met our revenues by 100%. We actually need it more because the outstanding real estate taxes will get collected at some point. They're not lost, they just didn't come in this fiscal year. So while this number the ending number would have been a lot bigger if we had not had the pandemic, we did end in a fairly good position given the situation. I'll stop there if anybody has any revenue questions before I go on to expenditures.
Any questions, anybody? On the revenue side. I don't see any, Susan.
Okay, all right, so let's look at the general fund and the operating budget. I do want to note that in May, the council did a whole bunch of transfers that I brought to you where we were moving money from accounts that had been identified as having extra money, And we moved it into some of the salary and OM of some of our departments that were having a lot of expenses related to COVID. Shortly after we did that, the Department of Revenue issued a memo that said they wanted cities and towns to create 2 revolving funds, one for FEMA and one for COVID CARES money, and move all of those expenses into those revolving funds. And if those revolving funds remained in the red, they would not hit our free cash when they certified our free cash. So we moved some money into some departmental budgets, but then ultimately ended up moving the COVID-related expenses elsewhere. So that's one of the reasons you see some surpluses in the PS and OM accounts in some of the departments. Going through this, a couple of things that just look kind of like large surpluses. On the first page, the collector, the OM budget had almost 100,000 left in it. This surplus was due to the shutdown of the parking system. We didn't have fees for the Complus system and other things related to the enforcement side of our parking system. So that's why we had such a large balance there. If you go to the next page, human resources, in their OM budget, they had about 40,000 left. We had planned to use a consultant to work on multiple projects with functionality of Munis, and because of the shutdown, we didn't do those projects. So that's that reason. If you go to the next page, central services, they had a fairly large surplus of 135,000, and a lot of this was related to utility costs. With a lot of all of the buildings shut down, utility costs tended to be lower. The police department had a surplus in salaries, mostly due to vacancies in the department. Same thing in the fire rescue department. They had salaries remaining from vacancies in their department. And then if the rest of the budget, if you go to page 5, veterans services also had a fairly large surplus in their OM. Mostly that's veterans benefits. And it wasn't that veterans didn't get their benefits. It's just that veterans benefits kind of hit a high a few years ago. They were high of about 664,000 back in 2014. And they've been coming down every year. So last year we spent 465,000 in veterans benefits. And this year we only spent about 400,000. So that's why there's a surplus in there, and we have adjusted that in the 2021 budget. And then I think pretty much that's, the next page, page 6, under municipal debt service, there's a $40,000 remaining. That's because we get a rebate from the federal government for the ESCO and CREB projects, which was basically the energy efficiency project we did way back in 2010. But we have to budget fully because the federal government isn't always reliable about paying this ESCO and CREB rebate. So we have to fully budget for it, and then we get the rebate. So that's why we had a surplus there. And then the next page, medical insurance, again, we ended with 146,000. We were 98.7% expended. That's so it was a very small portion of this budget, but again, that's mostly explained by vacant positions. And then lastly, cherry sheet assessments. As I said, we did not pay out as much as we thought we would on charter schools. In fact, we paid out 464,000 less in charter schools, but we paid out $91,000 more for school choice. So the net of charter and choice, we did end up paying, we ended up saving 369,000 from what the cherry sheet said we were going to have. So it's fortunate that that happened in this particular fiscal year. So with that, we ended with a fairly normal surplus. We tried to, we're never going to spend 100% because if we did, we'd probably overspend. We try to keep our budget, within 5% of what we think we're going to spend. And the free cash that generates from this is usually somewhere between 3 and 5% of our budget, which is pretty typical. And I think that's what we'll have this year despite the pandemic. Are there any questions about the general fund operating budget?
Susan, I do have a question, please.
Yeah.
Councilor Labarge and then Councilor Jarrett.
Thank you, Counselor. Looking at the general budget, on the police PS, the police OM, and the police CAP, what is actually the total of their budget?
What page are you on, Counselor?
Um,
Please. Okay, so their total budget was 6.7 million, and they spent 6 million. They encumbered 25,000, and they returned 676,000.
They returned 676,000?
Yes. And you can see that the bulk of it was in salaries.
Okay, gotcha. That's what my next question was.
Okay.
Thank you.
Councilor Jarrett?
Yes, thank you, Director Wright, you've answered almost all of my questions. I just had one about the health department, which also showed a percent used of 76.8%. Could you speak to that?
Sure. The health department was one of the departments that back in May, we had actually moved quite a bit of money into the department because we knew how much overtime they were doing. But then when DOR said, no, move it to FEMA or COVID cares, we moved it there. So we spent a lot in the health department this year. It just doesn't look like it right here. So
Great.
just so the council knows, we just filed an application with FEMA for almost $500,000 for reimbursement for costs. And we have received thus far from the CARES Act, $340,000. So between what we've applied for CARES and what we've applied and received from FEMA, what we've applied for from FEMA and what we've applied for and received from CARES, we're just almost under $1 million. So COVID has been costing us a lot, but we're fortunate right now we've got FEMA and CARES to take some of those costs off our plate.
Thank you. And I know that that's a lot of work doing, applying for all those reimbursements, Susan. So thank you for all that work.
Well, we're fortunate in the FEMA reimbursements are being handled jointly by Josh Shanley in the fire department and myself, and I'm doing the CARES Act. So I do have help, and the good news is Josh's time on FEMA is also reimbursable. So that's an added benefit.
Mm. Are there other questions on expenditures?
I want to thank Susan. Excellent report, and I appreciate that, Susan. Thank you.
Thank you.
Do you want me to do the enterprise funds, or okay, I see council?
All right.
Yeah, Councilor Quinlan, and then if you can move on to enterprise, that would be great. Thank you.
I just want to note that I think it's, as I look at this, the expenses specifically, it strikes me that none of them came in over budget. Does that seem odd that not one of them came in over budget?
Well, remember, we do budgetary transfers throughout the year. So if you look in the column on this that says transfers and adjustments, you can see that we have moved money into those accounts in anticipation. So there were budgets that were exceeded this year, and we did move money. I can't end the year with any of these line items in the red because I have to stick to what you vote. Sure. So you have moved money by June. Remember, we have the meeting in July, and so we have those 2 weeks up till July 15th to kind of wrap up the fiscal year. So remember, we did a transfer for legal costs and a few other things. So that's why. So some departments did exceed their budget, but we were consulting and getting approval from council as we went along.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, Susan, please, if you could go on to the enterprise funds.
Okay, so there's not a whole lot here to talk about with the enterprise funds. All four are on that one report. The most notable thing on the revenue side of the sewer and water is that the sewer and water rates both came in about 94-95% of what we anticipated. And talking with Director LaScalia, water was down because Smith College went home. And Smith College is a large water user, as well as hotels and motels. So while residential use was up slightly, a business use of water was down. And what happens in water also happens because the two are tied together in sewer. So that is the reason for the shortfall, at least on the revenue side in those categories. But with other revenue sources that they had, water came in at 98.9, sewer came in at 99.7, stormwater came in at 100%, and solid waste actually came in slightly above. So all of the revenue line items for the enterprise funds, with the exception of the rates, came in fairly much as expected. And then, as you can see in the expenditures in those enterprise funds, particularly in water and sewer, a lot of large projects that are ongoing are encumbered, and because a lot of those projects happen over the summer. So all of those funds came in. There are very few surprises in the enterprise funds. And as I said, other than the rates, the pandemic does not seem to have had as much of an impact on the enterprise funds as it's had on the general fund. That's it.
Okay, thank you. Are there questions on the enterprise funds? Or any other questions for Director Wright? Oh, Councilor Nash. Councilor Nash.
So I can see my video. Oh, there I am. Looking at spreadsheets. Director Wright, in terms of the hotel motel, has the state been able to delineate yet about short-term rental revenue that we've gotten, or is that kind of still folded in and we don't know what exactly we're seeing there?
So the short-term rentals get folded into the hotel motel. However, you did pass those 2 impact fees that don't affect all of those, but affect some. And we brought in $4,699 in short-term rental community impact fees. And those fees goes into a separate account for the affordable housing. So those give us a little bit of a sense of what the short-term rentals have been bringing in. It's not a huge piece of this, but it is a piece of it.
Excellent. The other question I had, you mentioned how the demand fees were down and that we had extended the deadline for property tax. I'm wondering if that actually had an effect on why we saw less property tax revenue at the end of the year, because we extended that deadline, and maybe that was a factor in that. Do you think that might be the case, or?
Well, we only extended the deadline till June 30th. So now people that did not pay by June 30th have to pay interest back to June 1st.
Right.
I do think that if people didn't, particularly on real estate, because those bills tend to be much larger, I think that people were unable to pay. That's basically my assessment, is that for that to be such a large amount, given that last year was about $500,000 and this is 1.4, it does point to some stress that people are having over getting their real estate payments in.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, seeing none, thank you so much, Director Wright, for giving us that quarterly update.
All right.
Really appreciate it. Okay, moving to our next item, it's financial orders. So 20.101, in order to accept donation of easement for Olander Drive. And this is, that's that. hold on, where is it? In the City Council, August 20th, 2020, upon the recommendation of Mayor David J. Narkowitz and Planning and Sustainability, in order to accept a donation of an easement for Olander Drive extension, whereas the city obtained a Mass Works grant to fund the Olander Drive extension as a private road to serve the planned Village Hill North Commons affordable housing. Whereas an easement for Olander Drive extension and its related infrastructure, utilities, and retaining wall will provide the city with the rights, but none of the obligations of a roadway and ensure city compliance with Mass Works requirements. Whereas the Olander Drive extension easement and a new donation of 18.51 acres to the city for the Mill River Greenway, which was authorized by City Council on December 3rd, 2009, is shown at the Hampshire Registry Plan Book 247, page 66. Ordered that the mayor is authorized to accept said easement for the Olander Drive extension and associated facilities. Okay. Is there a motion for a positive recommendation?
Motion.
Motion's made by Councilor Labarge, seconded by Councilor Thorpe. I see your mouth moving. I'm going to give that, I'm going to say yes. And discussion, I see that Director Fiden has joined us. Hi.
Hi. Do you want me to talk?
Please.
So very straightforward. We received a $950,000 grant from MassWorks last year. This is paying for the Memorial Park, which is virtually done. If you haven't been there, you should go. It looks great. And starting the middle of September, we'll pay for an extension of Olander Drive to serve the new 53 units of affordable housing that TCB is building at North Commons. MassWorks require that we, even though it's going to be a private road, MassWorks requires that we can't spend money unless we have a public interest in easement in the road. So this would just allow us to have an easement. The road will look and feel like a private road, I mean like a public road, but it will be private. It will be maintained by TCB. The city has no obligation beyond the MassWorks grant that we have, but this easement will allow us to spend those funds. We anticipate the TCB will take title to the property in about a week or two. They're then ready to grant us an easement immediately, and we're ready to start construction immediately. We have a contractor on board. So we are asking for 2 readings tonight, so we're not delayed in beginning construction on the site.
Okay. Councilor Dwight.
Okay. Wayne, we of course not all that long ago did a massive amount of street acceptances, formerly streets that evolved over time that were private ways, and we needed to conform with state law because we were plowing these roads and we were even maintaining some of them. And I'm just wondering if this sets us up for one of those kind of vague misunderstandings a generation from now, where there's an expectation of maintenance, sewage, storm water, and plowing.
So it's a really good point. The easement specifically spells out the city has no obligation to do the work, I think, for exactly the reason you're saying. Frankly, if there's ever an interest, once we finish the MassWorks grant, we can always give up the easement if we want to. I think we're protected because the easement says clearly we have no obligation. I think the key part, as part of your point, is we should make sure we don't start plowing it.
Right, exactly. Yes. Thank you. Thank you, Wayne.
Councilor Jarrett.
So this is a private road. Is there public access?
Yes, so that's what the easement says specifically. It gives the public all rights as if it was a public road. So the public can pass and repass along the road. I mean, it dead ends at North Commons building, so it's not necessarily access to somewhere else. But as if it was a road, you can, if you want to walk your dog or go for a stroll or visit, you still have the right to do it.
And there's access to the Mill River Greenway.
That's correct. So separate from this, each component of the state hospital has extended the bike path network. So there's access to the Mill River Greenway on the bike path. It's currently a bike path under construction. If you go up today, you'll see it's paved, up to basically just south of Memorial Park, and it's gravel up to overlooking the Mill River that will become paved. So that would be public access.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, seeing none, roll call please on a positive recommendation.
Councillor Labarge,
Yes.
Councillor Quinlan,
Yes.
Councillor Shara,
Yes.
and Councillor Thorpe.
Yes.
Okay, that moves forward with a positive recommendation from Finance. Next is 20.103, in order to award the contract for FY 2021 to FY 2023 audit to Scanlon and Associates. And Laura is gonna pull, Laura very nicely wrote a helpful memo. Is there a motion in a second for discussion? And then oh wait, hold on. Let me read the order and then we'll get a motion. Okay. In City Council, August 20th, 2020, upon the recommendation of the Finance Committee, 20.103, in order to award the contract for FY 2021, what is struck is FY 2023, which we could add in if we want. I'll discuss that in a minute. Audit to Scanlon and Associates ordered that, whereas Section 7-6 of the Northampton City Charter requires that the City Council annually award a contract for an outside audit of the books and accounts of the city to be conducted by a certified public accountant, by a firm of certified public accountants, which has no personal interest, direct or indirect, in the fiscal affairs of the city or any of its officers. Now, therefore, be it ordered that the City Council hereby awards the contract for auditing services for FY 2021 to Scanlon and Associates LLC at the prices and rates quoted in the proposed dated August 11, 2022. That I maybe should say memo. No, proposal attached here too. Okay, is there a motion?
Move to approve, please.
Second.
Motion's been made by Councillor Quinlan, seconded by Councillor Thorpe. So the way this is written, so the motion is as written. So what is in red that has been struck is would not be included unless we amend it. So Laura has added those because a question for the Finance Committee, or if we choose to then move it on to a question for the full council, is whether we would like to award this contract for just this year, the fiscal year that we're in already, or whether we want this to be a 3-year contract. So is there, Councillor Dwight? Oh wait, hold on, you're muted.
So you may recall that one of the recommendations that is coming forward from the Charter Review Committee was to grant these contracts for the auditor for 3 years, for subject to review, to allow for consideration for another auditor. That's not it. That item is not in effect. It's a recommendation. It is a policy that we could make and could do. We could grant this as a 3-year contract, which would just be a continuation of Scanlon's ongoing auditorship for the city of Northampton. There are those who are concerned that we should have different and new eyes, although Scanlon has accommodated that request and concern. When they concentrate their audits, they go to particular aspects, large revenue aspects of the city, and change it up each time. They're very thorough. They have proven to be an unimpeachable agency, but the fact is that maybe with a new auditor, you would have the opportunity to see some things that we wouldn't otherwise notice. That said, I just want to, I personally, my personal preference would be to grant the 3-year contract as if the recommendations from the Charter Review Committee stood and were enacted. But that's entirely up to the council. Well, first the Finance Committee and then the council. But I just thought that information is worth having at least put it up for discussion.
Thank you. Councillor Labarge.
Yes. I also feel that we need to look at keeping Scanlon's associates for 3 years. As a city councilor, same with Councilor Dwight, we've always gotten a very good rapport from Susan Wright, our financial director. They are so experienced. They work well with the department heads. Susan has told us several times of their knowledge and how they can call them. They're there, they work together, and they know our city. So I feel a 3-year contract is suitable for Scanlon's associates because of their experience and their knowledge and how they have been working with our city departments for quite a long time.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So I'll note that we have a quote for them for the next 3 years. So we would know what those costs would be over the next 3 years. If we just awarded them 1-year contract, we would ask them for their quote again next year. So they've always been extremely fair and consistent in the modest increases that they've done each year. But whenever you send something back out and you don't have a contract in hand, there's that risk that the quote could be higher than what they're showing us for the next 3 years. Councilor Maori, did I see your hand?
Yeah. No, well, first of all, thanks to Laura for all of her groundwork on this. That was a lot, and I appreciate you doing price comparisons because I feel, pretty comfortable thinking of a more long-term 3-year relationship. I do have a question. I see a pattern in their billing, F1 1647, F1 1747. They hit, and then it went up 2,000 in F1 18 and 19, and then they just seem to be jumping faster. So FY 20 is 50,000, and then it goes up to 52,000. I'm seeing the price jump faster, and I'm just wondering about that.
I see Director Wright is still with us. I don't know, Director Wright, if you have any thoughts about that or could answer that, or.
I believe that they are increasing some of their costs because there are additional government accounting standard board requirements that are coming into effect, as well as additional work related to FEMA and CARES auditing. So all those things are going to cross multiple fiscal years for a while. But I believe a lot of the additional cost is due to additional GASB requirements.
Yeah, that's what I suspected it had to do with the times we were in, but I wanted to make sure.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Laura.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I had received some of the historical bills from Scanlon, and they had historically gone up over time modestly. Even before the contract period that we're in FY 2015, the cost for the examination of the basic financial statements was $39,500, and it was $3,000 for the audit of the retirement system, for a total of $42,500. So that was the fiscal year before the 3-year contract began. Trying to get back to where I can see the figures on the screen. So, he has just gradually had modest increases historically, even before, this contract period, that were similar in size. If that made any sense.
Yes, it did. Thank you. That's helpful.
Other questions or comments? Okay, so seeing none, so Finance Committee, what would you like to do? We can send it forward as written, and then we can ask the full council, if the full council's will is to do a 3-year contract, we can amend it at the council in a couple minutes. Or would you like to make that amendment now and move it forward with that amendment?
Make the amendment now.
Okay. So does someone make a motion to amend, and so the amendment would be the putting back in what has been or adding the language that has been crossed out on the order as written.
Yeah, I would move to include the language that's been stricken back into the order to create what is in essence a 3-year contract here.
Seconded.
Second that.
Okay, that's been made and seconded. Any discussion on that? So wait, do we need to vote on the amendment? Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so any further discussion on that amendment? So roll call, please, Laura, on the amendment.
Okay. Councillor Quinlan,
Yes.
Councillor Shara,
Yes.
Councillor Thorpe,
Yes.
and Councillor Labarge.
Yes.
Any further discussion on the order as amended? Seeing none, roll call, please, Laura, on the order as amended for a 3-year contract.
Councillor Shara,
Yes.
Councillor Thorpe,
Yes.
Councillor Labarge,
Yes.
and Councillor Quinlan.
Yes.
Okay, that moves forward to the council with a positive recommendation to award the contract for FY 2021 to FY 2023. Next is 20.104, in order to reprogram surplus from CS security upgrade to CS elevator roof project. That is in the council, August 20th, 2020, upon the recommendation of the mayor, order that $25,000 of surplus funds remaining in the Central Services Security Upgrade Collector's Office Project 19303-586212 be reprogrammed to the Central Services Municipal Building Elevator Roof Project 1930305855501 to be added to the original appropriation of $40,000 to provide additional funds necessary to meet the recent lowest bid received for the repairs. Is there a motion?
The motion.
Second.
Motion's made and seconded for a positive recommendation. I see Mayor Narkowitz. Hi, Mayor.
Yes, good evening, councilors. As is indicated, we've been trying to, we've had an ongoing repair project that we've been bidding to try to fix the roof structure. If you've ever approached the Pachowski building from the roundhouse side, you may have noticed there is sort of a separate shaft structure, and if you look at it more recently, you'll notice there's a tarp over it. The roof is badly degraded. It's a metal hip roof frame, and it has glass inserts, and the frame has become rusted, and the glass panels have begun to leak. And this is right over the top of the elevator shaft in the building. So this is a bid that's come in, and we want to get the work done and get it taken care of before the weather turns. And they'll basically be removing the existing structure, and then the masonry at the top of the shaft will be repointed and sealed, and then there'll be a new roof that'll have wooden framing and a rubber membrane roof and then metal trim. So we are seeking to move some money from another project into this project to be able to cover the full cost of the bid, and we're seeking 2 readings so we can get it started in the fall before the weather turns.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Labarge?
Yes. I want to thank Susan and Central Service, David Pomeroy's, because when I read this order, I said I couldn't understand it because it's saying a building elevator roof project, and I couldn't figure out why would a roof be involved with an elevator, not knowing that there was a problem with the roof. So with Susan and both David Pomeroy's explaining to me exactly what you just did now, Mayor, made a difference. So I understood exactly where the problem was. So I thank you all for that.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Jarrett.
Just two Scrivener's errors. City of Northampton is missing from the top, and in the last sentence, the word "to" should be between necessary and meet.
I can fix those for the final order.
An additional one to be added to the original appropriation of $40,000 to the provide. So to take out the before provide. Thank you. Any other comments, questions? Errors? Nope. Okay, seeing none, roll call, please, Laura.
Councilor Shara,
Yes.
Councilor Thorpe,
Yes.
Councilor Labarge,
Yes.
and Councilor Quinlan.
Okay, that moves forward with a positive recommendation. There's no new business. Is there a motion to adjourn?
Move to adjourn.
Okay, motion was made by Councilor Quinlan and seconded, I think, by Councilor Labarge. Roll call, please, on adjourning, Laura.
Councilor Thorpe,
Yes.
Councilor Labarge,
Yes.
Councilor Quinlan,
Yes.
and Councilor Shara.
Yes. Okay, we are adjourned out of finance and we are back from recess into the council. And we are going to take up those financial orders. So we're at 20.101, in order to accept donation of easement for Olander Drive extension.
Move to approve.
Second.
Motion was made by Councilor Labarge, seconded by Councilor Thorpe. Any discussion? Hearing none. Roll call, please, on a first reading.
Councilor Nash,
Yes.
Councilor Quinlan,
Yes.
Councilor Shara,
Yes.
Councilor Thorpe,
Councilor
Yes.
Thorpe.
Thorpe, yes. Okay. Councilor Dwight,
Yes.
Councilor Foster,
Oh, hold on.
her hand.
The
Councilor
sign for
Jarrett,
unmute me, yes.
Councilor Jarrett,
Yes.
thank you. Councilor Labarge,
Yes.
and Councilor Maori.
Yes.
Suspend the rule.
Motion's been made to suspend rules.
Second.
Okay.
It was seconded by Councilor Thorpe.
Yes.
Yes. Any discussion on suspension of rules? Hearing none, roll call, please, on suspending rules.
Sure. Okay, Councilor Quinlan,
Yes.
Councilor Shara,
Yes.
Councilor Thorpe,
Yes.
Councilor Dwight,
Yes.
Councilor Foster,
Yes.
Councilor Jarrett,
Yes.
Councilor Labarge,
Yes.
Councilor Maori,
Yes.
and Councilor Nash.
Yes.
Move to
Move second reading, please.
Motion's been made by Councilor Dwight, seconded by Councilor Labarge for second reading. Any discussion on second reading? Hearing none, roll call, please.
Councilor Shara,
Yes.
Councilor Thorpe,
Yes.
Councilor Dwight,
Yes.
Councilor Foster,
Yes.
Councilor Jarrett,
Yes.
Councilor Labarge,
Yes.
Councilor Maori,
Yes.
Councilor Nash,
Yes.
and Councilor Quinlan.
Yes.
Okay, that passes unanimously in two readings. Moving on to 20.103, in order to award contract for FY 2021 to FY 2023 audit to Scanlon and Associates.
Move to approve.
Motion's been made
Second.
by Councilor Labarge, seconded by Councilor Dwight. So this is the order that was, sorry?
I was going to say, if we're going to proceed with the amendment, then the title of this has to change from 2021. Oh, I'm sorry.
It's
No, it
right.
doesn't.
Yeah.
It's correct. I'm sorry. I take it back.
But thank you. I was just going to note that it was amended in finance so that this is a contract for 3 years, starting in our current fiscal year 2021 to fiscal year 2023. Any discussion? Okay. Seeing none, roll call, please.
Counselor Thorpe,
Yes.
Counselor Dwight,
Yes.
Counselor Foster,
Yes.
Counselor Jarrett,
Yes.
Counselor Labarge,
Yes.
Counselor Maori,
Yes.
Counselor Nash,
Yes.
Counselor Quinlan,
Yes.
and Counselor Shara.
Yes. Okay, that passes unanimously in first reading. Next is 20.104, in order to reprogram surplus from Central Services Security Upgrade to Central Services Elevator Roof Project.
Move to approve.
Second.
Motion's been made by Counselor Labarge, seconded by Counselor Dwight. Any discussion? Seeing none. Counselor Nash, was that a eyeglass adjustment or a raised hand?
Eyeglass adjustment.
Okay. Seeing none, roll call, please, Laura.
Counselor Dwight,
Yes.
Counselor Foster,
Yes.
Counselor Jarrett,
Yes.
Counselor Labarge,
Yes.
Counselor Maori,
Yes.
Counselor Nash,
Yes.
Counselor Quinlan,
Yes.
Counselor Shara,
Yes.
and Counselor Thorpe.
Yes.
Suspend the rule.
Second.
Motion's been made to suspend rules by Counselor Labarge, seconded by Counselor Dwight. Any discussion on suspension of rules? Roll call, please, on suspension of rules.
Counselor Foster,
Yes.
Counselor Jarrett,
Yes.
Counselor Labarge,
Yes.
Counselor Maori,
Yes.
Counselor Nash,
Yes.
Counselor Quinlan,
Yes.
Counselor Shara,
Yes.
Counselor Thorpe,
Yes.
and Counselor Dwight.
Yes. Move second reading, right?
Yep, motion's been made for second reading. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Counselor Thorpe. Any discussion on second reading? Roll call, please, Laura.
Counselor Jarrett,
Yes.
Counselor Labarge,
Yes.
Counselor Maori,
Yes.
Counselor Nash,
Yes.
Counselor Quinlan,
Yes.
Counselor Shara,
Yes.
Counselor Thorpe,
Yes.
Counselor Dwight,
Yes.
and Counselor Foster.
Yes.
Okay, that passes unanimously in two readings. Next, we're moving on to financial orders on second reading. This is 20.091, in order to accept gift of labor and materials to repair grave of George Hudestia. This is second reading.
Move approval, please.
Second.
Motion was made by Counselor Dwight, seconded by Counselor Maori. Is there any discussion on second reading? Seeing none, roll call, please.
Counselor Labarge,
Yes.
Counselor Maori,
Yes.
Counselor Nash,
Yes.
Counselor Quinlan,
Yes.
Counselor Shara,
Yes.
Counselor Thorpe,
Yes.
Counselor Dwight,
Yes.
Counselor Foster,
Yes.
and Counselor Jarrett.
Yes.
That passes in second reading. Next is 20.092, in order to accept gift of plaque for grave of Basil Dorsey.
Move approval, please.
Second.
Motion was made by Counselor Dwight, seconded by Counselor Jarrett. Any discussion on second reading? Roll call, please, Laura.
Counselor Maori,
Yes.
Counselor Nash,
Yes.
Counselor Quinlan,
Yes.
Counselor Shara,
Yes.
Counselor Thorpe,
Yes.
Counselor Dwight,
Yes.
Counselor Foster,
Yes.
Counselor Jarrett,
Yes.
and Counselor Labarge. Councilor Labarge?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, that passes in second reading. 20.093, in order to accept gift of $3,000 from the Ruggles Center for Park Street Cemetery gravestone repairs.
Move to approve. Move to approve.
Second.
Motion's been made by Councilor Labarge, seconded by Councilor Dwight. Any discussion on second reading? Roll call, please, Laura.
Councilor Nash?
Yes.
Councilor Quinlan?
Yes.
Councilor Shara?
Yes.
Councilor Thorpe?
Yes.
Councilor Dwight?
Yes.
Councilor Foster?
Yes.
Councilor Jarrett?
Yes.
Councilor Labarge?
Yes.
And Councilor Maori?
Yes.
That passes in second reading. 20.094, in order to accept gift of up to $100,000 to replace fencing at Bridge Street Cemetery.
Move to approve.
Second.
Second.
Motion's made by Councilor Labarge, seconded by Councilor Thorpe. Councilor Nash.
I just want to once again thank Director LaScalia for all the work that she did on pulling this together. It wouldn't be happening without her work. So thank you.
Thank you. I agree. This goes for all of these four gifts. I again want to thank the people giving them for preserving and beautifying our history. Very, very grateful. Any further discussion? Seeing none, roll call, please.
Councilor Quinlan?
Yes.
Councilor Shara?
Yes.
Councilor Thorpe?
Yes.
Councilor Dwight?
Yes.
Councilor Foster?
Yes.
Councilor Jarrett?
Yes.
Councilor Labarge?
Yes.
Councilor Maori?
Yes.
And Councilor Nash?
Yes.
Okay, that passes in second reading. Next, we're moving on to orders. 20.102, in order adopting the City of Northampton Hazard Mitigation Plan update. This is first reading. 2 readings have been requested, and this is the order. In City Council, August 20th, 2020, on the recommendation of Mayor David J. Narquist and Planning and Sustainability, an order adopting the City of Northampton Hazard Mitigation Plan update. Whereas the City of Northampton established a committee to update the city's local hazard mitigation plan. And whereas the City of Northampton participated in the update of the City of Northampton's local hazard mitigation plan. And whereas the City of Northampton 2020 Hazard Mitigation Plan update contains several potential future projects to mitigate potential impacts from natural hazards in the City of Northampton. And whereas a duly noticed public meeting was held by the city's local hazard mitigation plan update committee on June 22nd, 2020 for the public and municipality to review prior to consideration of this resolution. And whereas the City of Northampton authorizes responsible departments and/or agencies to execute their responsibilities demonstrated in the plan. Now, therefore, be it ordered that the City of Northampton City Council formally approves and adopts the City of Northampton Hazard Mitigation Plan update in accordance with Mass General Law, Chapter 40.
Move to approve, please.
Motion's been made and seconded to approve, and Director Fiden has returned. Can you unmute?
Yes.
There you go.
Thank you. So I'll be brief. We do this every 5 years. We did the first plan, 20 years ago. It helps for 2 things. One is it helps for planning for hazard mitigation. We do this both through the FEMA process and separately through our resiliency planning process. But it brings departments together, it brings the community together, and it often helps us think about which we do differently for the next 5 years than the last 5 years. So not surprisingly, for a process that was going on during COVID, a lot of our conversations are which we doing differently in terms of hazard mitigation to think about pandemics, which frankly was not part of what we did 5 years ago. But the other reason the plan is very important is its requirement for getting FEMA money for a lot of hazard mitigation projects. So the project that we did, that DPW did a few years ago, rebuilding the retaining wall along River Road in Leeds, that was FEMA funded hazard mitigation money to prevent flooding. So that was a big ticket item. the house that we raised on Riverbank Road a few years earlier, which is a very relatively small project, but raised a house out of the floodplain. That came from hazard mitigation funding. So we've done big projects and little projects. The reason we're asking for 2 readings tonight is the plan we did 5 years ago just expired a week ago. As you know, we have a grant application pending for money for the ice pond off Route 66. And with the plan expired, that project goes on hold. So we're trying to go forward in the process. The reason, it's not that we didn't know the deadline was coming, but we applied for and obtained a FEMA grant that paid for the planning process. Because the timing of that grant, we couldn't get the plan done earlier than this process. So good plan. I mean, just sort of the quick highlights that I said is thinking about COVID, just sort of as a lens for thinking about things, looking at invasive plants as sort of one of the clear changes, climate change related impacts. The resiliency hub that you've all talked about, you authorized us to do a gift fund. We've identified that in the plan. Again, doesn't guarantee we'd ever get FEMA money for it, but it makes us eligible. It's a key part of our resilience. And then a couple of really big projects you all have been discussing, I think, for years about DPW upgrading their 1940s era pumping system that lets the Mill River go out through the dikes during a flood. So we're specifically identifying that and specifically identifying the need to keep the flood control dikes built in 1940, 1941 up to date. Those are old projects, but the one that's new, that's really important is the flood hazard mitigation maps for Northampton. The maps that determine what's floodplain and not floodplain for regulatory purposes were last done in 1974. FEMA is going through an update process. We've been asking this for 20 years. They're finally going through an update process. As part of that process, if we don't get the flood control levy certified under FEMA certification, then FEMA will assume that it's not adequate to protect us from a flood. And so all of Pleasant Street, all of Lower Main Street would be a floodplain, which would make it virtually impossible to have any new construction because the cost of construction would go up so much. So we've been aware of this for a couple of years. We are currently working on a $300,000 grant from the state to test the levee, to put core samples through the levee and move us towards being certified. And so we have some state money for that. But having the plan is really important because that becomes probably the most important flood control item we can do in the next few years.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Dwight.
Wayne, the other problem, of course, without FEMA support or FEMA's imprimatur is that all those properties on Pleasant Street are down in the newly identified floodplain would be uninsurable. Their mortgages would literally go figuratively and literally be susceptible to going underwater as well. I mean, that was part of the bigger conversation about why we need to subsidize the stormwater management system here in the city. So this is, I mean, talk about catastrophic. Without even experiencing a storm or any pressures, the city could be rendered moot.
You're absolutely correct. There's sort of 3 elements going on. As you know, DPW, since you authorized the stormwater utility, has been doing a lot of work on the levees already, catching up for deferred maintenance. We are checking the drilling through the dam, is checking the core to see the integrity of the core of the dam. The dam was very well built in 1940. It was overbuilt. They put a margin of safety. But the technology of tying a dam into the ground wasn't as strong in 1940. So the biggest weakness potentially is water slipping underneath the dam during a flood. So all that stuff's underway and we're in good shape. I'm sure there's going to be some maintenance that's needed. The mayor and DPW have spent a lot of effort on this. It's not new stuff. The wild card in this is we don't know. I mean, we know the condition of the dam and what it takes based on where the floodplain was in 1940. We don't know what FEMA is going to say the new 100-year flood elevation is. So we're doing this in parallel. We're moving along, but we can't finish our work. And if they say the flood elevation is a foot higher, which is likely, we're safe because the dam was overbuilt, so we're not going to have a problem. if they say it was 6 feet higher, we may not be safe. So we're sort of going back and forth in those steps.
Thank you. I guess.
Other questions? Okay. Oh, Councilor Jarrett.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank you and Director Fiden and everyone else who worked on this plan update. I attended the public meeting back in April and was just impressed with the scope of the plan, the depth of the research, and the historical information. So having lived through some of the more recent events in there, it really gave me a sense of the relative severity of events and how they impacted Northampton.
Thank you.
Other comments? Okay. Seeing none, thank you so much, Director Fiden.
Thank you.
Okay, if there's no further discussion, then roll call, please, Laura.
You, Councilor
Sorry, I'm sorry.
Foster.
I'm a delayed hand. I had to think. Director Fiden, if you don't mind coming back, I had one follow-up question for you.
Director Fiden. There he is.
Thank you. Sorry. When I was reading the plan, I noticed that the concept of a resilience hub is in there, and I was wondering if you could just talk a little bit more about what the process of developing that will be. I know it's a long one. I just would love to hear kind of where it is and what your thoughts are.
Yeah, it's a long process, and there's a lot of uncertainty just in terms of grant funding. I mean, it's not quite throwing spaghetti against the wall, but to some extent it is. So we're applying for grants as they come up. And we've received some small grants already that really just helped us with the planning process. And so we just don't really know the timing period. So we're doing sort of 3 things. We're working with our partners. Community action is almost certainly going to be our lead partner. We're working with we need everyone together. We don't think it's the role of the city to run a hub. So the city's helping with the grant funding and the capital improvements. We think it should be run by a nonprofit, and community action brings a poverty lens. So we want to serve everybody, but we also want to sort of change cycles of poverty, and they bring that, but they also work well with ServiceNet and all the other players out there. So we built the partnerships as the first part. We're applying for grants. Both the city is applying for grants that we're eligible for, and community action is applying for grants that they're eligible for, which makes the time uncertain. And sort of with one eye, but really just one eye, we're watching the real estate market. I mean, if we found a perfect property tomorrow, we don't really have the funding to move forward, but we don't want to miss opportunities. So we're certainly aware of what's happening out there. Incredibly sadly, as you all know, but real estate prices are probably, while residential property is not declining in Northampton, commercial property probably is declining. And so we just want to be aware of what's going on. So those are sort of the 3 tracks that we're working on, building our partnerships, looking for funding, and watching real estate. So time is uncertain. We are sort of playing with, if the right money came through and we could move forward in a physical hub, it could happen quickly. If it didn't move forward, we're sort of beginning to talk about, is there a lighter version we can start with? Existing rented space that community action or some of the nonprofit has that we can use, a virtual hub to keep the conversation going.
Thank you.
Any further comments or questions? Any last minute hands? Okay. Seeing none, roll call, please, Laura.
Councilor Chiara.
Yes.
Councilor Thorpe.
Yes.
Councilor Dwight.
Yes.
Councilor Foster.
Yes.
Councilor Jarrett.
Yes.
Councilor Labarge.
Yes.
Councilor Maori.
Yes.
Councilor Nash.
Yes.
Councilor Quinlan.
Yes.
Okay. That passes in first reading, but there's a request for 2 readings.
Move to suspend rules.
Second.
Made and seconded to suspend rules. Any discussion on suspension of rules? Roll call, please, on suspending rules.
Counselor Thorpe,
Yes.
Counselor Dwight,
Yes.
Counselor Foster,
Yes.
Counselor Jarrett,
Yes.
Counselor Labarge,
Yes.
Counselor Maori,
Yes.
Counselor Nash,
Yes.
Counselor Quinlan,
Yes.
and Counselor Shara.
Yes. The
Move
rules are
second reading,
suspended.
please.
Motion's been made
Second.
and seconded by Counselor Maori, just for second reading. Any discussion on second reading? Roll call, please, Laura.
Counselor Dwight,
Yes.
Counselor Foster,
Yes.
Counselor Jarrett,
Yes.
Counselor Labarge,
Yes.
Counselor Maori,
Yes.
Counselor Nash,
Yes.
Counselor Quinlan,
Yes.
Counselor Shara,
Yes.
and Counselor Thorpe.
Yes.
Okay, that passes in 2 readings. And I believe we've come to the end of the agenda.
What happens at the end of the agenda?
I would ask you for a motion to adjourn, please.
Move to adjourn.
I'll second that.
Motion's been made by Counselor Foster, seconded by Counselor Dwight to adjourn. Any discussion? No. Roll call, please, on adjourning, Laura.
Counselor Foster,
Yes.
Counselor Jarrett,
Yes.
Counselor Labarge,
Yes.
Counselor Maori,
Yes.
Counselor Nash,
Yes.
Counselor Quinlan,
Yes.
Counselor Shara,
Yes.
Counselor Thorpe,
Counselor Thorpe.
Yes.
and Counselor Dwight.
Sure. Yes.
Okay, we have adjourned. Thank you, everybody.